Good morning, everybody, and welcome to everyone here, to members of the board and members of the public who may be joining via Teams Live. The meeting that we're having today is live streamed, and a recording of the meeting will be placed on the Trust YouTube channel. Members of the public are reminded that we have the feature of live subtitles, and they can be accessed by clicking on the screen should you require that. I know we're all getting very used to this now, but for perhaps newcomers, if we could mute mics if you're not speaking, use the chat function to indicate you wish to speak, and that speakers introducing a report should assume the members of the board will have read the report and highlight the key points only, and there are prizes for succinct presentation. Questions will be asked once your speaker has finished, and I'll try to cluster the questions, 2 or 3 together to maximum efficiency. We try very hard to avoid the use of acronyms, but we're still learning, so could we help each other with that? And questions from members of the public come at the end of the meeting. You can raise questions using the Q&A function. Our company secretary will review them as per the protocol, which you have set out in your agenda. And then at item 26, there'll be a maximum of 15 minutes allocated for those questions. Sian Millard, our company secretary, will ask the question on your behalf and then seek a response from the relevant director. If there isn't an immediate response, written responses will be included in the minutes. Now, we do have a number of starred items on our agenda today, and I have asked for questions in advance about those. We have been notified of one in item 22, the end of life care annual report, so I will take that one question. We will endeavour to conclude this part of our meeting around 1 o'clock. But we do have an extremely busy agenda, and I really want to ensure that we demonstrate and enjoy good governance by having the conversations we need to have. So I should be grateful if questions can be put succinctly and indeed responses. Apologies today. We have apology from Sarah Price, Non-Exec Director, Adam Broom, Non-Executive Director, Alistair Grant, Medical Director, and we're pleased to have Jill Derrick, Deputy Medical Director, in attendance. Thank you, Jill. And also apologies from Karen Kay, System Director of Urgent and Emergency Care. There is a variation to the agenda, as item 16 will swap time slots with item 15 to enable the Guardian of Safe Working Hours to join us at 11:50. Coming to item 2, are there any declarations of interest in relation to any items on today's agenda? I don't think so. Thank you for the head shaking. But the register of board members' interests is available on the Trust website under Your Trust Board. Minutes of our previous meeting held on the 2nd of September. I haven't been notified beforehand of any inaccuracy that is material or any comment needed to be made. Is anybody wanting to comment at all on those minutes? No, in which case, can I once again thank Sian and the team for a really good set of minutes. That brings us then to our action log, and you will see that we do have updated annotation of the items. Are there questions in relation to any of those items? And while you're thinking of that, there are a few actions overdue as a result of capacity and or recent changes in leadership of a portfolio. So my apologies for those, but they are in hand and will be proceeded with as described on the log. Do colleagues have any questions about the action? No. In which case, thank you for that. That then brings us to our service story. For members of the public who are not aware, we have a service story, staff or patient story at the beginning of every meeting because we like to remember why we're here and we also like to learn from anything that we can pick up. So if I could invite Kim O'Keefe, our Joint Director of Nursing, Midwifery and AHP, to introduce the item. Thank you, Kim.
Yes, thank you. So today we often talk about the impact of what our teams and services make on our patients in the real live world. And today I'm really fortunate, and I can see her on screen, to have Louisa Forbes with us, who is our consultant nurse for care homes, community and virtual ward services. So I'm going to do a little bit of the introduction because I know how humble Louisa is and I want to give it justice. And then Louisa can take us through the learning, summary, recommendations and finally the quote. So I think, next slide, please. So we're going to use a real live story. So noting that yesterday is a point in time, but I won't add to the dates and things. So you can see at the point in time at 0400, a colleague had referred a home resident who we'll refer to as John to Louisa as our consultant nurse and the services, and was asking for a possible intervention to take place while they waited for an ambulance crew to arrive to bring them up to Trelisk. The care home had dialed 999 due to John having the acute confusion. He was aggressive at the time and providing unmanageable behaviour, and the police had been called to the scene already. For a bit of background, he'd already had 3 recent hospital admissions. It included a failed discharge, and he had been discharged originally home from one of our community hospitals. He had a diagnosis of dementia, recent history of falling, head injury, a long wait whilst lying on the floor, urinary retention and possibly urosepsis, and he'd been on IV antibiotics and IV fluids in hospital. The failed discharge, as it was referred to, felt safe and comprehensive, and it had been overseen by the care home director. So Louise phoned the care home, she spoke to the manager. Care homes were very anxious, distressed. Everyone's under pressure in these very challenging times. They were unable to take any clinical observations and unable to support fluid input. And most importantly, they were unable to calm John down. So there was a strong sense that they could not cope and weren't equipped to cope and wanted him readmitted to the hospital or transferred to a specialist dementia home. The community psychiatric nurse had been called, but they were unable to get there at the time due to the caseload and some of the urgent things they had on in their diary at the time. One workforce emergency request was filled in, and a specialist mental health healthcare assistant arrived immediately as they were sourced, and they finally got there at 6 o'clock and stayed till 7:30, and the request for the GP to look at urgent medication. So to set the scene, the ambulance crew arrived. John was asleep and settled. One-to-one care was very good in supporting him. Reluctant to transfer to hospital despite the care home concerns. Paramedic and specialist practitioner. Louisa arrived at 10 p.m. and again at 11 p.m. They discussed the action plan to support the care home and most importantly to keep John where he knew, to manage John in his own safe environment. The care home was really supportive once they had all this support. The manager stayed on after the end of their shift, and the after hours doctor arrived and administered the medication. And I want this slide because it just gives you a flavour of how many out of hospital services there are. So whilst there's always a temptation to think that the acute hospital, Trelisk, is the safe place, there are many skilled professionals that when they come together can absolutely support in a different manner that's far safer and manageable for John and the staff that they're with. And most importantly, I know that we had a board discussion about bringing on Louisa's post as a consultant nurse for care home and virtual, and actually the benefit of having Louisa in the situation that can, I'll say, command that force in an absolutely integrated fashion that helps everyone. So the update at the time was John had settled during the night, Louisa reviewed in the morning, he'd had his breakfast in the home, he'd drunk half a cup of tea, the CPN would be coming in to visit him on that day, the GP was going to do a total review of the long-term medication, we'd sent an urgent referral off to look at a dementia specialist care home, and the care home manager was working with additional support that had been requested, and John was getting one-to-one care safely in his own environment, and the same one workforce was supplying additional one-to-one care. So I will hand over on that point to Louisa. Thank you, Louisa, just to talk a little bit so they don't hear just my voice about the learning summary and recommendations and anything you'd like to add.
Oh, thank you, Kim, and thank you for having me this morning. It's a great opportunity to share it. Yeah, so the learning for me was really that with a sort of collaborative and creative, proactive approach, that we can deliver better experiences for our residents and our 5,000 people that live in care homes. And I think what was key to this was sort of the trust and the relationships and the communication. So a colleague from South West Ambulance Service being able to call me, and me being able to speak directly to the care home and just offer that sort of shared clinical accountability and support in managing risk, that felt really significant to the success of this event. One workforce absolutely need an acknowledgement here, because we have developed one workforce through COVID as a pool of staff that can be utilised and go to the greatest need across our whole system, so in and out of hospital, and they have been incredibly responsive on a huge amounts of times for me when I've needed them, and in this case that HCA that was able to go out there at short notice really made a huge difference to that experience. I think that some of the learning also is that this service really is important to be out of hours, so as you can see, a lot of this activity happened after 4 p.m. and into the evening, so I was still working on this at sort of 11 p.m. at night, so I think a lot of these cases do arrive with us out of hours, and that's a really key learning point for me, really. And also just the sort of collaborative, proactive approach from SWAST and colleagues, but I think some of that is due to the current system pressures, so some of that is a bit out of our business as usual. So for me, it's a bit about making this normal and promoting processes so that this can be done much more frequently. And the sort of key to it, as I said, was really around coordination of that case management, so looking at John as an individual, and it was entirely in his best interest to stay in his own care home. So I think we sometimes get very distracted with flow and the pressures on hospital, but from my experience, that it's really sort of multi-pronged impact in terms of patient experience and the use of our resources across our system in a much more much more quality of care way. As I said, we have 5,000 people that live in our care homes, and we've learnt so much in the last 18 months about how to respond to crisis and manage sort of major incidents. And I think there really is an appetite from residents themselves, from their families, and really from the staff that care for them within care homes to support care in their preferred place, which is care homes. And I think as a trust and as an integrated care system, we really need to be looking at how we can enable that in a more business as usual type way. And I hope that the service that we're developing for care homes and the virtual ward will do some of that. So happy to take any questions.
Louisa and Kim, thank you so much. That is such a good story. It so talks to the whole concept of person-centered care, doesn't it? And the fact that all the teams have been able to come together and flex around the person and the family and what's actually needed. So it's a very, very great story. However, I know that doesn't happen easily. I know how much effort it takes and how much I like Kim's word command. I don't usually like that word, but I know what she means. It really does, you know, actually having that authentic voice to say, do you know what, guys, we're going to do this. So I really value what you're doing and all of the people with you. Thank you very much. Happy we've got a little bit of time for questions if people would like to ask questions. You'll have to indicate with a cross in the box, please.
I think Ruth wants to come in, Chair.
Thank you. I haven't been able to see that. Ruth. I think you might be on mute, Ruth.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It was really great, and really great to see the personalised care and how everybody pulled around that patient to give them exactly what they needed at that time of crisis. I'm wondering, you absolutely talked about making this business as usual as we go forward, and I'm wondering about whether we have the resource in the right place to support this kind of intervention across those 5,000 people, and it's something like 200 care homes, isn't it?
Yeah, so we've worked really hard to sort of test and learn some work over the last 18 months in terms of clinical management and case coordination out of hospital, and that was mostly born out of COVID, obviously. But since March, we've opened that up to managing other conditions in care homes and just trying to be a bit more just safely manage risk, I think is the way to put it. And I've been lucky enough to, through the virtual ward, to have some funding for some senior nurses to work alongside of me on a temporary basis, and we've now got funding for them to be substantive. So at the moment I've got 3 adverts out for band 7 clinical nurse specialist, clinical allied health professional specialist to work in a small team. So there'll be 1 in each of the integrated care areas across Cornwall, and although that doesn't sound a lot in terms of resource, what I really hope is that they are an interface between our existing teams within those footprints. So as you know, we have PCNs that are maturing and developing in terms of clinical support for care homes through the Directed Enhanced Service that delivers Enhancing Health in Care Homes programme. So there's lots of clinicians within PCN areas now, and we also have within CFT in the integrated care areas a number of you know, fantastic sort of CCCs, the community coordination centres, and they link in with our multidisciplinary and multi-professional teams within those integrated care areas. And I really see these roles, and where I've come from really is just about building those relationships and knowing who you need in your phone book, and working collaboratively and in partnership with the clinicians that are already there, and not just not just clinicians, but you know, often adult social care and colleagues within older adults and mental health as well. So I think we are sort of getting there in terms of making this a bit more business as usual, and it's changing the appetite and the culture for doing it, and just being a bit braver and a bit more creative. But the more we do it, the easier it becomes. And I think, as I mentioned, my experience of care home staff is that they are really on board with this and they really want to do it, and they just need the tools to make it happen.
Thank you. Thanks, Ruth and Louisa. Carl and then Kim for finishing up.
My question just links to some of that conversation and Louisa's answers actually, but it's how we learn from the benefit of having a multi-organisational workforce working together without boundaries. You know, that you talked about your phone book, Louisa, but you know, being able to coordinate that and know who to talk to, probably with other aspects of our you know, the work programme within RTHT and CFT and wider organisation. I think it'd be benefit to know how that has worked so successfully. So probably not to debate too much now, but I think outside of the meeting we could do with understanding the benefits of that system, organisational and individual working together really, and the benefits of it.
Thank you, Carl. I wonder whether Kim might sort of sweep that up in your closing remarks, Kim. That would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I will share with you. Louisa and Fraser took a paper to our clinical cabinet, our nursing midwifery and AHP clinical cabinet, and it is about the year past and what the future plans are. I think that'd be a really good paper to share with everyone. I know everyone hears me talking about the benefit of that multi-agency. So, you know, whether we're integrating, collaborating, actually, this is part of that transformational workforce that we talk about, looking at different ways. And I think if I sum it up, Louisa's words to me are always so powerful when she said, "I can't help but imagine how differently this could have played out overnight for John, the patient at the centre of this story. He's had a very extremely traumatic few weeks, and the thought of him settled in his care home this morning made me very proud of the hard work and compassion, particularly SWAST and the care home staff." And I think that sums it up and brings that it when it isn't widgets. Maybe I shouldn't have said command, I should have said orchestrate, but actually it isn't just about someone being in a flow. This is about us really looking at individualized, personalized care and work, and look what we've done when we work as a system. And I'll leave it there. But Louisa, thank you so much. As always, inspirational.
Hey, and you too, Kim. Thank you for leading the service. So well done, everybody. That's just a wonderful thing to come out of COVID and the new normal, let it be. Louisa, we always say to visitors, you're very welcome to stay, but you probably don't really want to. But thank you for joining us. OK, that moves us on to the next two items, my report and that of Tony. You have my report in front of you. I do have a couple of pieces to add today. And the biggest thing I want to do is to say thank you to Tony. It feels very strange to be thanking you in advance of you going, but I wanted that thanks to be public and to be very heartfelt. You've taken over at a time that has been very, very difficult for everybody. And you've brought leadership to a team of staff who I know are tired because they've been working so hard and yet they have to go on. And Tony, it's a small world in Cornwall, because I was this morning having a vaccination and the husband of one of our staff was singing your praises. So I thought, how very nice. I'll tell you that as I thank you. So my thanks. I can confirm that Steve Williamson, our new substantive chief executive, will start on the 4th of January. But that Tony's very generously offered to have a handover period, which I think is going to be a huge benefit for everyone. I also want to add to my report my thanks to Karen Kay, who retires later this month. She's been on secondment with us from Kernow CCG since December 2018. I can't believe it's gone as quickly as that. So our thanks to Karen. And you'll also notice in my report that I'm welcoming Debbie Richards, the new CFT chief exec, and in doing that I would also like to extend a warm thank you to Matthew Patrick, who stood in at the Community Foundation Trust while they recruited a substantive person. If I could just let you know that although the board development plan is included for information, the programme is going to change for the 11th of November and the 2nd of December due to operational pressures. I almost don't like using that phrase because it begins to normalise it. We are under extraordinary times at the moment, and it is right that we flex to ensure that we are paying attention to the most important things. However, we will make sure that we build in those things that have to be juggled. The last piece I want to add, only because I'm having a wonderful meal tonight, is I'd like to wish a happy Diwali today. For anyone who's celebrating, and I am absolutely looking forward to my Diwali feast this evening. So I'm happy to take any questions, otherwise I'll ask you to note and record a few things. Any questions for me? No? Thank you then. In which case, if you just indicate your agreement to note the board and committee schedule for 22-23, which is Appendix 1. Note the update to the board development plan, which includes details of the trust non-executive director development plan at Appendix 2. It may flex a little bit more because of operational pressures, but it will generally be done. I'd actually like us formally to record our thanks to Tony for his services to us all and our community, and also would like to record our thanks to Karen Kay. So if you're happy that we note those things, I will pass over seamlessly to Tony and hope that he didn't meet somebody who commented on me this morning. So Tony.
No, John Govert sung your praises this morning, Mary. I'm very happy to report that back. So yeah, it's been a real pleasure actually to work with both the executive and non-executive at this extraordinary organisation. It's been a real pleasure to do it. You've not got rid of me yet. I'm going to be here till probably about the end of January. And I'm delighted to do so. There are 3 strands within my report. I'm not going to go through the detail of it. I know you've read it, but I just want to call out really the real focus for the executive over the weeks and months ahead. They are the same 3 priorities that we've always had, and it's strands of recovery really. The first one is around the urgent and emergency care, and we know we are seeing the challenges around that. We're already holding ambulances. We've got 29 patients in our ED department this morning waiting for beds. That's the equivalent of a whole ward worth of people waiting. There is blocks at the back door, but it is fair to say, I mean, you heard Louisa's presentation, you know, if we can really work together at times of crisis, that's when integrated care really gets tested. And actually, that's when the real benefits, because if that gentleman had been admitted, the chances are he would have been in for weeks and weeks and weeks, and he may well have lost his home. He could have ended up in long-term continuing care, you know, so that would have been devastating for him personally and also for the wider system. So the UEC recovery is a big part of that, and we're going to have a bit of an update from Susan later on the reset. The elective recovery programme continues. It is fair to say that NHS finances at the best of times are smoke and mirrors, but crikey, in H2 they are becoming even more challenging. And Carl will talk you through some of the processes around the bids that have gone in for our elective recovery. We are wanting to achieve 3 things through those bids. One is find a way of substantively reshaping the landscape of elective services across Cornwall in a way that means that we can have ring-fenced beds and theatres both in the west of the county, in the north of the county, and also here at Trillisk. That is that's a big prize, and we have a plan to get there. The second thing is digital, and then the third thing is people, our colleagues, and there's no point making investments in buildings and capital and in digital if we don't make investments in our people. And then the final bit of the recovery is that very point around our people. And Susan Young have been working with our colleagues within the staff engagement team to coordinate a big thank you week for all of our colleagues, which will be in the next couple of weeks. It's a really engaging process. We will make sure that all of the board are cited on it and get the opportunity to take part either directly or virtually. And thank you, Susan, for making that happen. I think I'm just going to pause there because Mary, you stole my thunder on the thank yous to Karen and Matthew and welcoming Debbie, but I think that's right and proper, and I just wish publicly in this public board meeting happy landings to the new chief executive when he starts in the new year.
Thank you, Tony. That's really helpful, and always appreciate people's view of how we're doing, because fresh eyes are always helpful. So just thank you for that. Does anybody have any particular issues to raise with Tony on what he said or his report? In which case, can I offer the board's thanks to you, Tony, on the behalf of the whole team for everything that is being done? day in and day out. It is outstanding. So thank you. That brings me then, I think, to item 8, and I want to invite. Yes.
Excuse me, sorry. I just wanted to note the governance improvement plan that is attached to the Chief Executive's report. If you could read the resolution.
I do apologise. Thank you for that. I'm trying to get ahead of myself. So we are going to note the Chief Executive's report, and we're being asked to approve those actions proposed complete within the governance improvement plan, and also approve the new deadlines proposed for action 7, which is executive governance, 8, legal advice models, and 14, observation of other trusts boards meetings. Although on that point, I would say that there have been a number of really good visits to other trusts already. And for the members of the public's information, this is us going and looking at good practice and less good practice all around the country, so we can bring great ideas back here. And those are moving on apace. So if I could ask board please to note and approve as I've just described. Thank you. I take silence as agreement. So thanks, Sian. Sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. So item 8, can I invite our Chief Operating Officer, please, to introduce this item? It is a presentation, and I'm grateful to you, Susan, for keeping it within 7 minutes, if you can, to allow time for any questions that the board may well have. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you, Chair. I will make it brief, and thank you for giving me the time to talk through this. This is a piece of work that we are doing and a programme of work that we're doing that's been evolving over the last few weeks, and has been agreed is very much something that's necessary. And for those of you that were here the last time we did a hard reset, which was a few years ago, was when we were in special measures. We know that we got a lot of success from that previous reset, and we know that we took a very similar approach when COVID had started way back when, and we took a very similar approach to resetting what we did within the trust to manage COVID. Okay, so if we could go to the first slide, just really I hope you can see this, and apologies if you can't. So it's just really, Chair, going through why we need a reset. So we know that we face very shortages in our key clinical areas. That's down to a variety of reasons, whether it's vacancies, whether it's sickness, and it's actually increased demand as well. So we're finding ourselves in escalation areas within the trust, and in fact we've gone beyond some of our more traditional escalation areas and into other areas that we would not normally go into. But Kim is working very closely with CQC to make sure that we are not putting any additional risk into our trust for our patients. We know that our patients face the longest waits in ambulance holds. Unfortunately, that's a mantle that I don't wish the trust to hold, but we are really struggling with our ambulance holds at the moment and working very closely. I have a weekly meeting with NHS England and SWAST on the measures that we're taking to mitigate them. And that we know from experience that when patients wait longer for routine care, they can come to harm while waiting, although we monitor this very, very closely. We know that COVID-19 is still fluctuating within our community, and as we speak today, we have 54 people within the trust that are COVID positive, of which 6 are in our intensive care units. I am very grateful to Joe Davis and the team. The modelling that's been done has been pretty much bang on. So the numbers that they have prescribed to us or told us that we were coming have been pretty accurate, and we've been able to plan on that basis. We're not through the worst of it yet, but we should start to see the numbers of COVID positive patients falling slightly. However, I think it's fair to say we're in for a difficult winter with COVID, flu, and all of the other infections that winter brings. And we know that our ED department remains under incredible pressure. Just a reminder, our ED department fits 40 people. Our demand on most days is above 80. And as I speak today, we've got 44 already in our department this morning. And as Tony's mentioned, we are holding 1 ambulance, which is not where we want to be. So we know that without targeted intervention, Chair, this position will deteriorate further. So the idea of the reset and the recharge, and it's important to say about recharging, because this is about as much for our staff as it is for our patients. Our staff are tired, they are feeling slightly beleaguered by the fact that we're not seeing a light at the end of this tunnel. So the reset is an opportunity for staff to have some time, to have some headspace. and to think about what the key operational changes are to help us get through what's going to be a very, very difficult winter. Okay, next slide, which I won't dwell on. This is just a set of data that tells us our positioning is worsening. You can see that our arrivals into our MIUs and EDs are starting to be where they were pre-COVID. We know that our 12-hour trolley waits, I hate to say, are increasing. Again, this is another indicator for us around safety. And we know that our diagnostics, which have been fantastic, and we've been one of the top performing trusts in the southwest, if not the country, we're starting to see a deteriorating picture because of the demand at the front door, as well as on our growing waiting lists. And as I've said, our ambulance delays are continuing to increase with actions taken. We are still seeing those delays increasing. And we are also starting to see some blips now within our cancer treatments. This week, I think, is fair to say, has been a difficult week in not being able to get cancer patients in for their operations. And prior to coming onto this call, I've had another call with our consultants and anaesthetists how we manage this situation over the next 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, we go to the next slide. So fundamentally, we've got 4 programmes of work and we have clinicians leading each part of these 4 programmes, apart from our enablers, which will be led by Susan and members of our finance department. So we're focusing very much on the non-elective. We've got some very clear headlines, Chair. We found it was a real success for us during COVID to be clear about the objective that we're all working towards. So for us, it's a zero tolerance of ambulance handover delays, and it's making sure that our elective programme is getting back on track. At the moment, what I'm trying to really focus on are our urgent patients and our patients with cancer. And we can see that backlog growing, which is a worrying picture for us, and again, another reason for the reset. And our intermediate care services, we've been offered a wonderful opportunity by the system to pull together all of the services that we've got currently into a much more defined intermediate care offer. We know as an acute trust we hold an awful lot of intermediate care type patients who need to be moved into a more appropriate care setting and being looked after by people with the most appropriate skills. I've been asked to be the SRO of this work, which is fantastic, and I'm working with the rest of the system. And whilst this is a much longer term piece of work, the discharge to assess piece and the single point of access, we are pulling into the hard reset. And then, as I say, we've got the enablers, of which Susan has got her own work programme to help our staff get through the winter and how we best support their health and well-being. We had a very good meeting yesterday, Chair, with our wider executive board and had huge support for this work. And I think we are going to make a difference. So what's within our gift? Next slide. So it's giving our teams time to plan and to implement rapid improvements. And this is all about rapid improvement. It's not the blue sky thinking. It's not the highfalutin strategy stuff that we all love to do. This is about the here and now and how we get through winter. It's focused internally, Chair. However, speaking to our system partners, they are all embarking on their own reset. And we will be bringing all of those plans together through the strategic meetings that Tony chairs currently. And what Tony will be able to do is hold us all to account as providers on the actions we said we're going to take and how we land those actions. We're looking to remove layers. We know in a crisis we put sticking plasters on, and for those of you that love lean, we know that lean removes processes, it removes layers and makes our processes that better and that much more efficient. So we do need to start delayering some of the processes that we've put in place for the right reasons, and they've helped us through, but we need to get through to more embedded practices that are going to help us through the longer winter and into the spring. And we need to, the message going out to our teams is this is getting back to basics. We need to bring back some of those processes that really worked for us during COVID and worked for us during the last reset. And we spent about 20 minutes yesterday with our wider team talking about the successes of the last reset, trying to focus people, because we know people become beleaguered when they feel that there's no hope and that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. So we went back through our successes from last time to get the enthusiasm and the energy up during the meeting, and it worked. It worked very well, in fact. And ultimately, we want to succeed our pledge to the people of Cornwall of providing brilliant care at the Acute Trust. So how will it work in reality? It's a 4-week programme, as I've said. It builds on the work that we've done from COVID. It's simply making things better, and we're doing very rapid changes, rapid QI, quality improvement methodology. We want to free up our staff, so we will be pulling down some of the meetings, those meetings that we need to meet our statutory requirements and our statutory duties, we need to continue with, but some of the other meetings we will pull down for the period of 4 weeks to give us our time for staff to think, and also for us as a group of executives to get back out and about and walking with our senior clinicians, asking questions of our staff around things like estimated discharge dates, how we do criteria-led discharge, what are the pressures that they're feeling within the ward, what do they think could make things better, because we often we know that our frontline staff often have the answers but just don't get a chance to express how they feel. We have got 100+ QI ambassadors that we've trained, we mustn't forget that. So those QI ambassadors will be helping to support our wards and it's also our departments. It's not just about the ward staff, it's pathology, it's our mortuary, it's our estates, it's all of those things, all of those departments and teams that we can help with some quality improvement methodology to make some very quick changes, delayering, taking processes out. And it's also looking at our data. How do we use data to inform our ward staff? So if you're a ward manager, how do you use your estimated discharge dates? How do you use your average length of stay to drive your board ward rounds with your teams? And Joe Davis's teams very kindly offered to do some very rapid training for our staff on the wards to help them make sense of the data that we've got. So last slide. At the end of the reset and the recharge, we would hope to have delivered many improvements, making our citizen processes caring for patients more efficient by removing those steps, asking staff how to make it better. We will land that with staff and make them feel part of a process and not being done to. We've identified very clear key themes and work programmes that will continue through H2 and potentially into 2022 and 23. And some of this will help form our cost improvement programme as well as our transformation programme. And will help to ensure that everybody's empowered to make improvements within their own area. And for us, really, it's getting our elective programme back on track, which is where we need to focus. We focus very much at the front door and the risk that we hold in ambulances. We are now seeing a growing risk that we're holding within our patient waiting list. And I'll leave it there. This has been launched this week, Chair. We have spoken to our staff and we'll continue to talk to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. That was a comprehensive description of what sounds like excellent action. And I really welcome your proactive and optimistic approach. I think, though, that the board will note that you are raising very serious issues with us, and that perhaps the most serious issue is whether people are being harmed waiting. And I think the second serious issue you raise with us is how, well, you use the word beleaguered twice, staff can be feeling, and I'm sure the sort of injection of energy that your presentation has just demonstrated will really help that. I think the only thing I would like to add before inviting any quick questions is also like to thank members of the public and families for the support that they are giving our teams and people who are in need of our services, because it really is the understanding of members of the public and the willingness and perhaps courage to go on looking after their people and make sure that they are having the optimum care we all want them to have. And I think we had a really nice example of that, didn't we, in our presentation earlier. So thank you very much to you and to your teams. Are there any questions or comments for Susan? I think perhaps not, Susan. I think you've done an excellent job and people are satisfied with your report. In which case, I'd like us as a board, please, to note our approach to reset and recovery, and perhaps our thanks to all of our staff for what is being done. That's really helpful. So if we could then come on to item 9, which is the system green plan. That's not, Susan. I think you've done an excellent job and people are satisfied with your report. In which case, I'd like us. Did everybody else hear that, or was it just me? Oh dear, I shouldn't have let the IT support go, should I? So I'll try again. Forgive me if we get another feedback loop. Green Plan Biannual Update. I particularly welcome this item for many reasons, and the RCHT's leadership within the NHS providers on our green agenda. But you know, we all know we're in the middle of COP season in Glasgow, and it's very welcome. I was very lucky to join an event put on by the NHS this week or last week, and some of the things that are contained within this report were being said across the nation. It was a national meeting, and the things that I took out really were the business about this agenda needing to be led from the top, it being everybody's business. We were reminded we could find out what our own carbon footprint is, so I did that. The other really important thing that I heard from my meeting, and it is reflected in your report, is that this green plan is in collaboration with our patients. You know, those conversations between doctors and patients that say, well, you could have this, but actually this one is better for the environment. And it was lovely to hear those things being said. So I welcome the report. Can I please invite, I'm not sure who is going to introduce the report, apologies.
It's Ros Davis, Chair.
It's
Yep,
Ros.
I'm here.
That's why you're here, Ros. Fabulous. Thank you very much. So if I could invite you to introduce the item, if you could keep your introduction as light touch as possible, assume we've read it, and then we'll take questions.
Sure, no worries.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the mid-year Green Plan update. So the Green Plan was approved by RCHT Trust Board in March 2021, but you will recall this was a plan developed by Cornwall Arsensillie Healthcare System following a declaration of a climate emergency last October. At the time our board agreed the plan, we also agreed to provide updates twice per annum to board on how our green plans were progressing. Board members will recall the Green Plan was fairly comprehensive and covered 10 areas of focus, ranging from travel and logistics to sustainable care models. Under each of these goals, we have several actions, and I'm pleased to be able to report that of the 37 actions scheduled for completion this year, a vast majority have either been completed or remain on track to complete by the end of the financial year. And perhaps even more importantly, our innovative approach to tackling the green agenda has afforded us national and even international recognition with several initiatives, such as the recycling of single-use masks, the issuing of reusable masks for both clinical and non-clinical areas, and also the Seagrass project, along with issuing litter pickers throughout our Cornish colleges, primary and secondary schools, which have captured the imagination and enthusiasm of a very wide-ranged audience. So sorry. So that's where we are, but what I'd really like to do is just let you know of 3 projects we've got that are up and coming, which are all quite exciting, but I will keep it very short. First one being what's known as a NOx cracker, so it's an Enter-NOx cracker. So this is a machine that neutralises Enter-NOx being a bad greenhouse gas. So we've got the first one in endoscopy coming on the 26th of November. So it has been done in Newcastle with a lady in maternity giving birth, had an Enter-NOx cracker, but we're the first in endoscopy. So the technology comes across from Sweden. Very excited about that, because there's also quite a large health and safety aspect as well that goes with that. So that's exciting. We're going to do it on a bowel cancer screening list, because we know that will get a lot of publicity, and that's what we want really, because then the rest of the country do it. So really good news for us. NHSI are involved, and we're going to do joint comms with them. So that's that one. The second one is an inhaler swap. So this is a county-wide inhaler swap, which involves all GPs, pharmacists, obviously our staff here. It's going from MDI inhalers, which are your metered dose inhalers, to DPIs, which are your dry powder inhalers. And it is important to remember that not all patients can swap. So you can't just put a blanket, we're going to swap over. You have to do this in a measured way. So what we thought we'd do is Not only do we have the big changeover, we've also invested in a COPD nurse so that we can pull people out of SDMA as they come through to avoid admissions by giving them simple inhaler techniques. That sounds crazy that it's a nothing, but it's massive. 70% of our patients are using their inhalers wrong. So even if you can't swap over, that's okay, but you need to learn how to do it properly then and make sure you've used all your gases. It's never going to be blanket for us. So that's really good. On top of that, we have access to warmer homes. So this is really good. So we know climate change is coming. We're going to be a wetter, warmer Cornwall. So that means if you suffer from fuel poverty, what will happen is you can't heat your homes, therefore you get mold, therefore you breathe it in, therefore you're admitted, you get in a big circle. So if we can link into the warmer home grants that the council are doing, which thankfully we've just sorted, it was a bit tricky, but we've done that now, we're nearly there, that's going to kick in. And what we'll also do is try and hit our elderly patients as well. So it's not just COPD, because these are the vulnerable patients that live at home or live as a couple with no, I don't want to say people looking after them, but there's nobody there for them. So if we can help them as well, that's going to stop a load of admissions and just care for Cornwall in general. That's what we should be doing. So that's that one. And then the most exciting one, which I can't talk massively about because it's strictly embargoed, but it's strictly embargoed because we hear it's likely to be presented at an international event in Glasgow today, or being well, is a trial of reusable PPE in the theatre environment. So that will go live from December. But as I said, can't give you more information, but how exciting is that? Because I'm sure you all know what I'm referring to. So for Cornwall to be on that is absolutely amazing. But I do think, you know, Cornwall is the right place to lead sustainability for the NHS. We're leading in so many ways. How great is that? So that is where we are.
Ros, thank you. Your enthusiasm comes across in absolute waves. Thank you very much. Would you be good enough to tell us what COPD is? Some people might not know.
Yeah, so Jill, can you help me? It's the chest. I'm not clinical.
It's a chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So it's yeah, bronchitis, long-term bronchitis.
Thanks, Jill. I was going to attempt it myself, but I thought leave it to the experts. Ros, that's a really, really helpful and very exciting report. And I'm going to take any questions that people would like. I have been asked if perhaps we could update board a little more frequently. Sarah Newton suggested that. I will do my utmost with very tight agendas, but I think it is really important to bring to everybody's attention, not just our public, just what is going on, because otherwise it's not seen. And I think it's marvellous, and I do think we should perhaps have it on a few of our hoardings and a few more places that people can see. But are there questions from colleagues for Ros? Richard Stevenson, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ros. That was a fantastic to see how the plan's going, and some of those initiatives are just brilliant. So I want to applaud the work of the team and your leadership in particular. I wondered also, in a more subtle way, how are we weighting green impact into every decision that we make as a trust? So is it now overtly in our consciousness when we make decisions what the green impact of that might be, and if not, how do we embed it further?
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say it's not in everything. It's certainly a movement within the hospital, within all staff members, and that's brilliant. So it doesn't matter what level you are, you're thinking really differently. But we do need to do more on the carbon calculating. So that's probably the gap that we've got. And a huge amount of wins will happen from estates. So we don't have an estates carbon manager yet, but we're working on it. But there's loads there. So that's all your boilers to, you know, do you really want to be using I can't think what they're called now because my brain's gone. But you don't want to be using oil when there's another option. Do we want to go to wind turbines? Can we stick solar panels on all our roofs? Who knows? Because the technology is moving so quickly as well. And as you said, things happen. I mean, weekly we're doing different things. Last night we announced that we're not going to logo our uniforms anymore, because if we do, it's committed to a lifetime in landfill, 30 to 40 years to rot. That's dreadful, isn't it? Just because you want a logo, wear a badge. It's quite simple. And what we're doing is we're collecting all our uniforms and we're sending them overseas now. So Afghanistan, Romania, there was about 6 countries which we can do that for and help them and give our uniforms a new lease of life. it's just thinking differently, but that came from actually my secretary. So, you know, it's everybody is thinking differently, and it's certainly spreading. And what I'd really hope, the more we work with the council, and certainly primary schools are so involved, you know, the more it becomes our Cornwall's movement, doesn't it? And we all think differently and we all work together. So yeah, the answer is we're not quite there yet. We do need to do that bit because we're going to be targeted and performance managed on it anyway. So we're not quite there yet, but we are working on that. We need to.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard, and also you, Ros. Nina Cara had raised a question in our chat here, which the public isn't able to see, about whether or not the fact that 100% of our electricity is now sourced from renewable sources, whether it's unique. And Carl Simpkins has made a response that it's part of the Crown commercial contract. So anyone with the same contract receives the same electricity. And we also generate 50% of energy from our own CHP plant. But you're going to have to tell me what CHP is, please.
It's the combined heat and power plant that we put in place probably now about 5 years ago from memory.
Thank you. And I think, Ros, you said we were getting national recognition. It's great that we are. I think that question has been answered. So if there are any more thoughts, questions, I think you will have seen in the chat, Ros, for the benefit of members of the public, we are asked to just all of us are saying how great this is. I think I did mention Sarah's question, which is fine. And I would just like to say thank you very much for you and all that you do and your team, and for an excellent report. Thank you.
I mean, just to add really quickly, if I'm allowed to, I spoke to Geneva this morning. That's how much we're known. I mean, who knew? Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you. I wish we could talk longer. You're very welcome to stay, Ros, as we always say to our guests, but you really don't have to. But it's there if you want to. Thank you for what you're doing. Which then brings us to item, no it doesn't, sorry. We are asked to note the progress against the plan and highlight areas of concern. I think what you're seeing is that we're just so pleased with what you're doing. And the only area of concern is let's make sure that we support you in keeping going. I just want to be sure around the suggestion that we have more frequent updates. It's bi-monthly on the Green Plan currently, and I think perhaps that does coincide well with our board. I hope that would be satisfactory. So we've got people noting the progress and also a nice comment from Kim and the ingenuity. Thank you. Bringing us then, Susan, Chief Operating Officer, to the Integrated Performance Report, item 10, which we're invited to discuss for assurance. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Chair. And I won't go on to too many of too much of the data. Sorry, somebody's just walked into my office. Too much of the data on here because I take it as read, but it's really just to point out that we are seeing a worsening position across many of our metrics, sadly. However, that's the reason for the reset and the recharge programme to start to recover some of these positions. I do need to point out that our 4-hour emergency standard has worsened, and the reportable 12-hour trolley delays, are the highest they've ever been for us as a trust. So again, we're stepping into places that we really don't want to be in and pull back from very, very quickly. We have had quite a bit of support recently from NHS England. I think it's worth noting we've had both regional visits and national visits. We had Julian Redhead with us on Monday, who is the medical director working with Pauline Phillips, who is our national lead for urgent emergency care. They're quite happy with all of the processes that we've got in place, and they do respond to the conversations that we've been having around some of the unique factors that we have in Cornwall, around things like our issues of accommodation, recruitment, for example. So we do have support, and we are being very open and honest with our regulators. I think in terms of our referral to treatment, our RTT as it's known, our waiting list continues to grow, as do the backlogs. what we're trying to concentrate on over the next 4 to 6 weeks is what we call our non-admitted pathways. So these are patients who don't necessarily admit long periods of time in the hospital or any inpatient stays at all, and can be treated as outpatients. So we are working on that because that backlog is growing, and I'm not quite sure whether or not that's an indication of some of the pressures that primary care are seeing, that patients are being referred to us who maybe previously not have been referred at that stage. I don't know, that is purely my feeling on it. It's nothing at the moment that's been backed up by any of our data. Our diagnostic waiting list is also growing, and we've seen our performance slipping, which worries me, because the slip in our diagnostics has a huge impact on our overall ability to manage our electives, because patients inevitably, in most cases, will go through some form of diagnostics in order for us to make the right decision about their treatments. So we really do need to work on that, and the work that Carl and Tom have been doing with the bids that we've gone in for H2 will help us in the longer term with some of this diagnostic capacity that we're looking in bringing in online at Bodmin. Our cancer standards, we're still meeting them, Chair. However, again, it's a note of caution that we are starting to see those slip, and that's not because we're not putting all of our efforts into this particular area of care. It's the same with ophthalmology and with cardiology. Those are the two other areas that we're spending a lot of time and effort in trying to manage. In terms of the brilliant improvement, I'll let Carl talk about finances in terms of our CIP and where we're going with CIP. We know that an awful lot of the schemes we put forward for the bids that we had for H2 we weren't able to take forward. However, I think it's worth us considering those longer term for some of the transformational work and for some of our ongoing cost improvement programmes. This includes developing the schemes associated with our corporate departments and our new models of care. So that work that we're doing as a trust, we're starting to see spreading out into working much more closely with our provider collaboratives. Brilliant people, I'll let Susan talk about brilliant people. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder. We have seen a slight improvement, however, in days lost to sickness. However, we are mindful that we're going into a difficult winter and that sickness will be an issue. We have a big campaign going on for the flu vaccination, as we always do, and encouraging people to have their COVID booster as well. I'm happy to stop there for a moment for any questions and for any of my colleagues to pick up their specific areas.
Thank you, Susan. Does anyone have any comments or questions for Susan before I bring in Carl and then Susan Young?
Mari, if you can't see, I put the cross in the box.
Thank you. I've just seen it.
Susan, thank you for that. And I think I recognise, and I suspect my colleagues also recognise, the immense pressures that the trust is under and our operational people are trying to cope with at the moment. I was just wondering whether or not you can provide us with some assurance that whilst inevitably we're going to see a deterioration of some of the numbers that are presented within the IPR, can you give us some assurance around some of the key areas? I note things such as duty of candour has dropped on this, sepsis activities are down and such like, and it's the sort of prioritisation somewhere in the system, isn't it, to make sure we do the critical stuff as much as some of the stuff we have little control over, such as RTT and such like.
Of course, yeah, and that's part of the reason, Paul, without wishing to keep repeating myself, why we want to do the reset, because what we want to do is look at our metrics, that are our most pressing metrics, and where we're seeing real deterioration, and where we know we can improve, because we know that we can improve. We've done this before, particularly around duty of candour, and we've got Bernie and Kim online who might want to pick this up. So that's the whole point of doing the hard reset. And what I'd be really happy to do, well, and I think we need to do anyways, I can bring back the update to the next call of where we are at the reset. So the reset we're planning to review on the 26th of November with a view to whether or not we need to extend it for another couple of weeks. My reckoning, my experience of being in Cornwall, this will be my 4th winter. At this point in time, we've got about 4 to 6 weeks to get ourselves in a ready state for winter. And we know that the rest of our system is under incredible pressure as well. We know that the issues that are going on within adult social care, in many of the companies in domiciliary care, handing their packages back. We know the issues that our care homes are facing at the moment. So what that leaves is with people that we are struggling to move on to the most appropriate care within our system. So the hard reset, being able to sell that to the rest of the system has been huge and very welcome, because us doing the reset on our own will only take us so far. But you're absolutely right to point out, we will be using Joe's team to help us with the data to pull out where we can see where we can make the biggest impact quickly, to ensure that it's the whole piece. It's not just about RTT, it's not just about ambulance waits, it's making sure that we're keeping our patients and their families informed and that we're doing the right thing by them every step of the way, and with our staff as well.
Thank you, Susan. I think it's to me it's one, the pace of the reset, but also it's the overarching approach that we keep our patients safe as much as anything else as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Paul and Susan, and I will note that for a formal action, a report back on outcomes from the reset when we come to the end of this item. I wonder if we could invite Carl first and then Susan Young to make any comments. I have a couple of questions for Susan, but perhaps Carl first.
Just on the issue around the savings, I'm happy to pick that up as part of my financial brief, Mari, if that's okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Could I also say, for the benefit of members of the public, and thank you to Bernie, George, we have duty of candour is now 85% for 2 months, but there are only 2 outstanding being followed through. And one of the issues about this information is when it's published, it's a point in time and it is very fluid. And I know Bernie has said that before. Richard Stevenson is suggesting we maybe have some national performance levels at the next IPR for comparison, and maybe at subcommittees, and that I think maybe we could have as another action. Kim, you wanted to speak. I think you might be muted, Kim.
Oh, sorry, if for some reason I just disappeared for a minute. I could just see everyone frozen. I do apologise. I think it's really important to note, especially with the Reset and the Restore programme, this is a system-wide programme. We are part of that system. So whilst Susan has absolutely eloquently explained what's for RCHT, for those of us that are dual, we know that the CFT plans are progressing and being communicated, and absolutely work in synergy with RCHT and other care partners such as primary care and the CCG. Also, communication is really key here. We've already heard it said that this is to help RCHT out. This is not to help RCHT out. This is a system-wide response to the critical incident we find ourselves in. But most importantly, how do we work collectively together for the long winter months ahead?
Yeah, and I think you're right to point up that issue about this is to help our CHT out. This is to help Cornwall out, and it's right that we say that. Susan, did you want to comment at all on the brilliant people?
Yes, thank you, if I may, Chair. So just want to draw out a few things in particular in relation to the metrics that you will have seen in the report and the kinds of things that we're talking about at the People and OD Committee at the moment. So you'll see that the turnover for the Trust is relatively stable, and actually it compares pretty well nationally and regionally. But the issue for us here is the increasing demand for our services, and therefore the pressure that puts on the need to recruit more staff. We are doing very well actually in terms of recruiting international. At the end of this year we will have recruited something like 100 international staff, so doing really well on that. One of the things that the People and OD Committee particularly looked at was that worrying trend around things like appraisals, mandatory training, sickness, absence, and some of the triangulation around that and the concerns that we have about that. So that's going to be a big focus for us in those committees. In terms of doing about that, you know, in immediately and the here and now. The reset and the recharge programme that Susan's described is a really significant one for us over the next few weeks. That's really about giving our staff time to rest and recover, take 10 minutes to have a break, and those breaks being non-negotiable, but trying to support people with somewhere to go in doing that, so that they've got time and they've got space to go, and we've got time for each other. So we're encouraging health and wellbeing conversations and colleagues just to check in with one another and make sure that people are okay. And there's something about caring for our staff as well as we care for our patients, and caring for each other as well as we care for our patients. So that will be a big message. As you heard in Tony's report, we've got a little bit of funding through the Trailblazer programme nationally, which is fantastic. And the big thing that we're doing as part of the Reset month is this thank you week that we've got. It's the week commencing the 22nd of November, and we really want to take the opportunity in there to thank our staff, celebrate the fantastic things that they've been doing. We've got some awards to give out that week as well. Sadly, much of it is going to be online, but we'll have a little bit of entertainment for staff online as well. So just try and really cheer everybody up and make everybody feel good about themselves in that particular week. And we'd really welcome the involvement of board colleagues in that as well. The executives were talking about this on a weekly basis and planning for it, but we'd really love the non-executives to get involved as well. And we'll get some dates out to you as to the kinds of things that you might be able to help with. So that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. I'm so glad you said that about the thank you week, because I was going to add myself that I was able to say thank you to a number of staff myself this morning, and unfortunately, by the way they reacted, I'm not sure we are saying thank you enough, and I think that's members of the public rather than ourselves as well. So I think we can all take note of just saying thank you for the ordinary things that did make a difference. I could see on the faces. So great idea for the thank you week. May I, having said that and celebrating the work we are doing, I do need just to raise a quick question about appraisals, if I may, to gain a bit of assurance. It's actually on page 110 of the pack. And I note that care groups are putting plans in place and that we are prioritising those who've had infrequent appraisals. But I suppose my anxiety is, will we see this line going in the other direction at any point? And you know, and I know we've taken action around making them very simple, but when you put that together with the clear feedback slides as well, perhaps my question is, can you assure me that we are not making appraisals so heavy that they don't get done, and we can make them sufficiently light touch so they happen?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, it is a real concern, as you say, and you know, one of the things that we have to be mindful of in this is that part of the issue here is that the operational pressures are making it more difficult for people. So we do need to make sure that the process is as simple as it possibly can be. And of course, during COVID, there was a deliberate decision for some appraisals to be stepped down at the height of the pandemic. So we are quite a lot in catch-up mode, which is making it more difficult for us, I think. But we've been hearing in the executive performance reviews that some of the care groups have got some really good ideas about simplifying the process. So what we want to do now is to pick up those good ideas and spread them more widely across the organisation as well, so that we make this, I don't want to say a light touch process, because actually it's a really important process, and it's just that thing about, you know, individuals having conversations with their line managers about the expectations of them, getting feedback on how they're doing, and that is actually a simple thing. So we'll also be encouraging that as part of the reset and recharge week. But it's going to take a while, I think, to catch up. So, you know, in terms of timelines, that I think that's going to be tricky, because the operational pressures are making it harder for us. But we've got lots of ideas about how we can, you know, start to move that forward further and faster now.
Thank you, Susan. And I wasn't wanting to suggest that appraisal should be light touch, but I think I'm assured by what you're saying, just as long as we keep getting on with it. And it's quite, Kim puts a comment in the chat there about sometimes shorter can be more meaningful, and it's just that sort of to the point and succinct. But thank you, colleagues, for this integrated performance report. Are there any other comments or questions? In which case, and in an amazingly timely manner, Carl, we can move on to item 11, your month 6 finance reports, please.
Thank you, Chair. At the end of month 6, the Trust has delivered its 3.1 million target deficit, but that's within the context of a system break-even position, which is incredibly important. There's no new significant variations to report to the board relating to income and expenditure. We've touched on the changes to the income model for the elective recovery fund previously, but no new variations. The executive continue to monitor closely variable pay, but expenditure variations will happen over the next 2 to 3 months as we manage expansion capacity and also staffing requirements through these heightened operational pressures. But there are processes that we've refined in the last 2 to 3 weeks that will make sure that's being appropriately applied. Just touching on the savings point that was raised, £3.7 million in H1 have been delivered, but in the main this is non-recurrent, and certainly the focus into the second half year plan, and I'll touch on that later, and 22-23 is important to see how we can convert some of those savings into a recurrent efficiency and productivity plan. In relation to capital, the plan position now reflects the adjustments of schemes and changes between capital and revenue to source the funding for the first floor Tremenal unit. Tremenal unit is the unit previously known as the PRU, and the target completion for that first floor is later this month, and that will be a great facility to help bring on board to support the operational capacity issues and pressures that we're facing. And just finally, work continues to review the capital programme on a regular basis to assess any risk of project slippage to ensure all resources, capital resources are available to this year are committed and accounted for in 21-22. And I'll pick up the H2, the second half year plan, later in the agenda with your agreement, Mari, and I'll pause there.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come back to Ruth in a minute, but are there any specific questions for Carl on this item? Okay, in which case we're asked to note the financial position for the 6-month period to the 30th of September. Thank you for that, Carl. And with apologies to Ruth, I think you put your cross in the box just as I was moving on to the next item. So if board will go with me, could we just step back into item 10 for a moment, because I think Ruth has a question she wants to ask.
Thanks, Chair. I have a question about recruitment. It's referred to in several places in the as action we're taking around the pressures we're under, and it's referred to about nurse recruitment. So I know we've done a lot of work around skill mix, and we're doing a lot of work around healthcare assistant recruitment. But I just wanted to be assured that we're looking more widely at multi-professional registered practitioners, not just nurse recruitment, because we know there's an issue. Well, we know there's an issue with workforce, full stop, but that's my question.
Thank you, Ruth, and I think Kim may be offering to answer.
Oh,
but Kim's got.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. Oh. That's better. There's a bit of a delay for some reason today. Absolutely, Ruth. I know it's easier to focus on nursing because there are so many KPIs around it, but please rest assured, and you'll hear me talking about workforce transformation, working with the Associate Director for the AHPs. Part of that is re-energising, re-looking, synergising the AHP workforce, which we know is a very large family, as well as working with Alistair and Gillian million around the MDT, especially in areas such as critical care, maternity, neonates, ED. So absolutely transformational workforce, and that multi-professional space is key as we go forward.
Thank you both, and we note that report. Coming back then into item 11, Richard has put a comment for assurance to the board. The Finance and Performance Committee received good assurance on the mechanisms for addressing any capital slippage, and you've pushed further on recurrent savings as a basis for financial sustainability. So thank you for your comment, Richard. Did you want to speak on any more on that?
No, thanks, Board. I thought it was just helpful for the board to hear that the scrutiny at F&PC was focused around capital slippage and around recurrent SIP as opposed to non-recurrent, which is helpful in year but not for the future transformation. Thank you.
Thank you. In which case, board is asked to note the month 6 finance report, and perhaps we could note that extra assurance. And it gives me a good segue into what I was going to say, and to introduce item 12, which is really to let members of the public know the board does have a number of committees that do a lot of the detailed work on the behalf of board and then bring reports to us. And so because a lot of work is done within those committees, we've brought some reports for your consideration into the pack today. But we want you to have assurance that each committee has gone into the depths of them. The way I want to go through this in order to do it thoroughly, but not to use more time than necessary, is I'm not going to invite chairs to introduce their reports. You have them there in front of you, but they are here, of course, to answer any questions that you have. So can I first of all check with the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee whether there are any questions for Sarah Newton? In that case, can I first of all ask us to note on item 12.1 the items that have been considered by Audit and Risk Committee, and may I ask us also to note that committee received the external auditor's annual report, which has been published per requirement to the Trust website. So thank you very much for that, Sarah and your committee. And again, for the interest of members of the public, the Audit and Assurance Risk and Assurance Committee has as members the chairs of all the other committees. So it's a really good place to come bring together and review that sort of strategic overview of how we're doing. So I appreciate that work. The Remuneration and Appointments Committee you have in front of you. If there are any questions, we will attempt to answer. Otherwise, we are asked to note. That's item 12.2. Thank you. The Finance and Performance Committee, 12.3, we're asked to note those items considered by that committee in September and October. I think we're just noting as we go along. But coming to item 12.4, the Quality and Risk Assurance Committee, we are asked to note the items at September and October meetings. And if we can note that, I would also like to note that that committee did receive the Research and Development Annual Report, and Bianca Mills and Lisa Trembath are here if there are any specific questions. They're not going to present the item because the committee has already done justice to it, but they are here because we are asked to note that report, that we are sustainably compliant against the 2021 core standards, and note that that group will monitor and ensure 2 partially compliant standards are converted into being fully compliant. We're also asked to approve the compliance statement for submission. So if anybody does have anything that they want quickly to mention thank you both, Lisa and Bianca, for being here. It's lovely to see you. Welcome. And it's good of you to give your time. But it looks as if there are no questions for you. So thank you. That means it was a good report, and obviously well discussed at committee. And we are also asked to note that the learning from deaths quarter four, and quarter one of 2021 reports were received. We're asked to discuss if we want to and note the quarter four and quarter one learning from deaths reports, but that was done by that committee as part of its work to give this board assurance. And finally, that's very nice. I'm going to read it out. People are saying what a very good research and development report and activity there was. So please take that thanks with you. And finally, that Audit and Risk Assurance Committee received the Patient Safety Incident Response Plan 12.4C in your pack. We are asked in this item to approve the Patient Safety Incident Response Plan. So if board members would be good enough, please just to put approve in the chat so that we can be sure board members have engaged in approving that. I'll do an approve there. That then brings us to item 12.5, the People and Organisation Development Committee met for its October 2021 meeting. Are there any questions on that committee assurance report? And if there are not, that committee also received the Medical Appraisal and Revalidation Annual Board Report, which is at 12.5A. We are asked to approve this report and take assurance that we met the standards required to be able to submit a statement of compliance to NHS England for the 2021 financial year, should it have been necessary. If we could note our approval there, please, that would help. And we're also asked to note that due to the NHSE waiver of medical appraisals during the COVID-19 pandemic, it has been agreed with NHS England that a statement of compliance is not mandated, but would be welcome. We are asked to approve the statement of compliance included as Appendix 1 to that report. If you'd be good enough to just indicate your approval, if indeed that is what you're wishing to give. And I think that then does conclude the item around our committee and committee assurance reports. And unless there are further comments or questions, which I believe there are not, that will bring us to item 13, the draft H2 Financial and Service Plan. If I could invite our Director of Strategy and Performance, who's regrettably not able to be with us today. So I understand Zoe Gretrix has joined us to help us with that. And obviously we have Carl on hand as well. So welcome, Zoe. We can suggest that you take it that we've read the report, but if there are any key points you want to highlight, we'd be very grateful.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper comes off the back of recent discussions that we held with Trust Board in relation to the refresh of our trust strategy next year. Whilst we had been due to present a 6-monthly strategic update on how we were faring versus our strategic milestones, in light of recent discussions, it felt more pertinent to outline what our prospective operational priorities are over the remainder of the financial year. So like last year, we are operating within unusual operational planning parameters caused by the pandemic, and have been asked to produce operational and financial plans separately for H1, which was the first half of the year, and H2, which is the second half of the year. So this paper summarises our operational approach to H2. The paper sets out national expectations with regards to what providers will deliver in H2, with a real focus on elective recovery, whilst maintaining organisational resilience for COVID-19 fluctuations. There are also points of emphasis around maintaining cancer standards, reducing ambulance delays, and crucially supporting the health and well-being of our staff. We took these parameters and held discussions with our clinical operational leaders in addition to Trust Board, and the plan on a page in Appendix 1 summarises at a high level the full content of our H2 ambition, centred around addressing 5 key problem statements, which are: 1, we need to deliver our elective recovery programme in order to minimise the harmful impacts of patient wait. 2, we need to ensure that urgent and emergency services on the Trillis site have the capacity to operate safely and productively. 3, we need to ensure that all our staff are engaged, supported and equipped to continue to provide brilliant care for our patients. 4, we need to retain the ability to flex our capacity to address fluctuations in COVID-19. And we need to ensure that we deliver value for money for the taxpayer and that services are effective and efficient. You'll see that incorporated into our plans is the Reset and Recharge initiative that is essential to our having the organisational headspace to progress more transformative aspects of the plan. And the plan will be supported in its delivery by any funding we receive through the targeted investment fund bids, which we have made as a health system, which Carl can update on. And just to note that Board are asked to approve delegated authority to the Director of Finance and Director of Strategy and Performance for the submission of the final H2 plan on the 16th of November.
Thank you, Zoe. It was good of you to step in at short notice. I appreciate that. Colleagues, do you have any comments or questions for Zoe before I just ask Carl to comment? It's very, very difficult not to use an acronym H2 when the solution is it's half one and half two, isn't it? But there it is. That's what we've been blessed with. Any questions at all for Zoe? I'm sure she'll do her best to respond. I think, Zoe, I particularly like the reference to trying to bear in mind that even though there are huge operational pressures, we must keep on with our transformational programmes, and that's such a difficult thing to do, isn't it? But it's welcome to see that in the report, so thank you for highlighting that. Carl, did you want to make further comment?
Yes, please, Chair. So just to add to Zoe's operational brief, the financial update that is set out in the report gives an update to board members around our interim plan that we took through private board last month from a governance perspective, put a budget in place for the second half year. The updated H2 plan, second half year plan, reflects the final planning guidance which was issued after last month's private board, and indeed the financial envelopes, which have enabled us to update the financial position and the recommendation and ask of the board to approve the H2 financial plan, which is an improved position actually. The resource that was available through the financial envelopes has enabled us, certainly as a system and potentially as a trust, to deliver a break-even plan overall for their 21-22 financial position. The 2 steps within that is that initially as a trust, our H2 position and recommendation for the board is a H2 deficit of 3 million. Overall, the £6.2 million deficit for the whole financial year, but that we are now looking at rebasing the what's called top-up resource and system top-up resource to enable each organisation to deliver a break-even position across the financial year, so that we will receive a further £6.2 million of resource in the second half year to enable us to do so. The governance around that fits with the submission on the 17th, but also each organisation signing that plan off through their organisational boards. So we will be able to report back in December that position, but it's a very positive position as we enter into the second half year that compared to where we were 3 or 4 weeks ago. Just the only other point to touch on, as Zoe has made in her brief and also Tony touched on earlier, this week we were asked to review and resubmit the targeted investment fund bids, which is all focused around elective recovery, a mixture of capital and revenue and including digital bids. We had 48 hours to review those earlier on in the week on the basis of the delegations the board have already given Tom and myself. Those submissions have gone in and we still await to hear from the centre as to whether we've been successful of those. In total, between revenue and capital, there's around £7 million worth of bids across our system, probably a higher proportion within RCHT, but a number of really important system-wide bids around how we can utilise, for example, the Bodmin site around elective recovery plans. Now, the flexibilities that have been offered to us, and the reason for the resubmission is that we're now looking at capital investment plans across 2 to 3 years. That wasn't the case when the original planning guidance. That is incredibly beneficial to look at how those schemes now can look at elective recovery, not just in this year or the final quarter of this year, but into 22-23. Once those schemes have been supported or we get the feedback, clearly I'll be in a position to update board members as to how we can progress them. And of course, bearing in mind it's the 4th of November, there really is a very short period of time now between now and the end of the financial year to progress some of these plans. So we are anticipating feedback as soon as possible, but we do need to then progress those plans with the utmost urgency. I'll pause there.
Thank you very much, Carl, for that, and also thank you to you and the teams for the very quick turnaround that you needed to do on that. Are there any questions for Carl or Zoe? I think my only comment, Carl, and it is on that point, is it feels to me, I might be wrong, but we do seem to get quite a lot of these quick turnaround requests, and there's a bit of me that thinks we should respond, and then there's another little bit of me that thinks we'll respond against our priorities, because they do divert attention for a little while, don't they, while we try to deliver. I would be grateful if you perhaps bring to the attention of the board as soon as you hear what the progress is, because the worry is we won't be able to implement fully.
And no problem at all, Mari. The benefit, the one benefit from the revised submission was the flexibility for the capital schemes over financial year, which has enabled us to look at that profile and the delivery. But of course, what we still need to commit to in delivering, whatever resource we get for 21-22 is spent appropriately, and we're making progress. But as soon as I hear, I'll let everybody know.
So we'll take that as an action. I think board would be happy to hear it by email, and then we will report it to future board so that we do know. Kelvin, a question from you.
Just responding to the point around whether things are consistent with our priorities. I think Carl would agree that quite a lot of work was put into making sure that the bids were consistent with priorities. So yeah, we've got good view of the priorities. The challenges tend to be more around responding in a matter of hours in terms of the amount that's expected for a quality response.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree totally. The work that was done previously does, and certainly Kelvin at some point will be on a brief on the digital bids as well, but they absolutely link back to the priorities, and at a system level as well, actually. Yes. About how we can, it's the whole population of Cornwall around elective recovery, not just Trelisk centric or the west, up towards the east. So some real benefit in that.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for the assurance about these things being submitted in line with priorities. I had hoped that would be the case. Richard Stevenson.
Probably just repeating that, I think one of the things that we were looking at with the Finance and Performance Committee when we considered this, and we're happy to recommend, particularly the delegated authority to move swiftly, is that it's based on the clarity of those priorities, it's based on the alignment of those. So actually the board, I think, F&PC certainly were assured that the decision making is aligned entirely with our priorities, and therefore the delegation, even though there are some substantial sums of money and sign off there, it will be appropriate because the executives are executing against those priorities.
Thanks, Richard. That's really helpful. And again, it's a really good example of what we were saying earlier about the way in which the committees do the work of the board and then report to the board. Thank you. Tony is just noting that the H2 plan is in line with longer term priorities. So that's excellent. Just before I read out what we're asked to approve, I think probably for the third or fourth time already this morning, I've heard reference to whole Cornwall solutions, and this being about all of Cornwall and our whole communities. And reflecting even a year ago, I don't think it was as much that way. So I perhaps would like to note that, because I think that's really, really good. We are then invited, in respect for the H2 financial plan, to approve the updated plan for the period 1st of October 21 to 31st of March 22. So that plan is a 3.2 million deficit plan, excluding system funding redistribution, and a 3.14 million surplus, inclusive of non-recurrent system funding redistribution of 6.61 million, and that will enable us to deliver a break-even plan for all three organisations. We're asked to note the full year financial position on the basis of the funding realignment would be financial break-even. Note the risks set out in respect of the delivery plan. Note the details of the targeted investment fund bids, as we've just been discussing, submitted by the system to the support elective recovery. They're not currently reflected in our financial plan. So if we could approve and note those things in the chat, we will also be noting the H2 planning requirements and noting the plan on a page, which is at Appendix 1, which Richard Stevenson has already commented was very helpful, and indeed I found that very helpful as well. Thank you. Okay, I think we have sufficient approvals coming through there. Thank you very much for that, Zoe. Thank you for being with us. As ever, you're very welcome to stay, but you may not wish to enjoy that. But thank you very much for coming this morning. Which brings us on to item 14, the Maternity Services Patient Safety Monthly Report. And I'm going to invite our Director of Nursing, Midwifery and Allied Health Professionals to introduce the report. Kim, if you'd be so good as to do that.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to take the report as read, but I am just going to go through a few highlights that I'd like noted. So as I did explain last month, we have seen 4 incidents in this reporting month, 2 with no learning identified and 2 where we took some minor but immediate actions to rectify. There have been no themes or trends identified across the 4 incidents, which is important to note. We did have an HSIB visit, which is the Independent Investigation Bureau that looks externally, which is right, and peer reviews our incidents and reports. Now that was a planned visit, so this had nothing to do with having the 4 incidents. It was a very positive visit, and I spent time with the inspectors yesterday, and they spent time walking and talking with the teams, and we had our quarterly update. They have been very complimentary of the processes we take, the fact that we have an open and honest and a shared learning culture, which allows us to have difficult conversations. And we are having an internal quality summit to look at these 4 incidents plus 1 other, which will come in next month's report, just to work with the team. The team are understandably, we know things happen. We're in a very complex, high-risk service, but it's just about multidisciplinary teams getting together and having the ability to talk about events, learning, and how we move forward and ensure that that we continue this ongoing learning. There has been 1 maternal death in this report as well, and if I can remind my colleagues and board members that a maternal death is within 12 months of delivery. This was a really tragic case where Mum had stage 4 bowel cancer, and the team have been complimented on the support that was given through this really sad time, and our thoughts are with that family. Please note, and you've heard me speak about it before, there's been a marked increase in our referrals. and that can be seen in this report. There's a marked increase in our social complex cases. So as you've heard me say, we had 5 babies born in the care of the court over this last period. That's unprecedented. For as long as I've worked here, that is not common. We've also seen a huge increase in referrals where partners have poor mental health, domestic abuse and substance misuse. So we're working really hard. The team have found that over this quarter that the number of statutory responsibilities, which are multi-agency meetings as regards our vulnerable, have tripled. And that could have the impact that the safeguarding team are less visible. However, you have heard me say, and Carl has supported and approved, we will be making some of the fixed term contracts we've had in place permanent. It's really important that we're supporting this service because we know these numbers are continually rising. The dashboard you'll note is red, and that is because of the 4 incidents in the maternal death, and that's important to note. Safe staffing still remains an issue. There's lots of risk mitigation going on. It does look more positive for November and December. And the team have worked hard. So we've pulled corporate nurses in, management time. However, we've got to be really, really careful with some of the CNSs because they perform roles that are very specialist with our most vulnerable. So we keep an eye on that. And noting that our maternity and short-term sickness remains high, but the team are mitigating that. You'll note that we had 373 births. It's our highest birth rate since 2 years ago, and I think that will continue for November, so important to note. For Ockenden, we still have the 2 remaining. We have just, as everyone else has nationally, received our report that we submitted on the 30th of June. We are busy updating that, and there's a huge recognition that this has almost become like CQC compliance. And we're looking at permanent administration support to be able to support with Ockenden, CNST, LMS. We have fully recognised that this is a labour intensive role and it's easier to be on the front foot than keep going back. So we're supporting the team with that. And Saving Baby's Life, we just have the 1 amber, the other 4 are green, and it's the continued work we're doing around smoking cessation. But noting the increase in complex cases has made this quite challenging, but the team are doing their very best to be able to do what they can working with our most vulnerable. And I shall leave it there unless there's any questions. Sarah, I don't know if you'd like to add anything. You were at our meeting.
Yes, thank you very much. Just one thing to note that there is a huge administrative burden on clinical staff to submit data so that we're compliant. And I very much support what Kim's saying for additional administrative sort of internal governance support, the sort of support that is provided from the assurance teams, the risk assurance teams, so that we can free up more of our clinical staff and they have oversight, but supported by more administrative staff.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Kim. I think it's very sobering to listen and to read your report, particularly around those complex and more vulnerable people, because this is what we've heard reported, haven't we, throughout the pandemic, and that the instance of domestic violence as well as smoking and other things that are happening. And I'm really grateful to be able to comment on the extra work that requires from our staff, because people who are in unfortunate situations are often not feeling safe for themselves and not feeling confident. And so I know that it is extra from staff, and I know that they step up to the plate, which I think is fantastic. I think in terms of the administrative burden, you note, I know that is being discussed nationally, as I'm sure you are both aware, and I'm happy to agree that it's good to get in some more capacity there. I think when I've thought about this, I must admit recently, I've thought, goodness me, this does feel like an extra load. But then I won't mention the trust, but I had to listen to some comments about another trust not a long way from here, and some of the reasons why perhaps this Ockenden has been necessary at the moment, and it wasn't best practice, and it wasn't for lack of trying. So what we're hoping is that the loop will eventually close and we'll get a bit more capacity generally. But thank you both for your work and for your report. Other questions on Kim's Maternity Services Patient Safety Report? I think this must indicate, Kim and others, that our reports are getting better, because they're clearly answering people's questions and concerns, and I'm glad, because members of the public also have the chance to get much more easily accessible information in really good reports. Thank you. Shana's popped up. Is that because you want to say something?
It is, thank you, Chair. Yeah, because you're running a fair bit early. We don't have John Stratton or Joe Burton yet, so I just wondered if you wanted to go on to the board assurance framework just while we get hold of them.
Yes, I will do that, and thank you. I have sent you a couple of texts, but they may not be getting delivered to you. I was timorous enough to suggest that we might have a short break sometime if we're doing as well as we are, but let's go ahead then and do the board assurance framework first, while we see whether John Stratton and Joe Burton can come. And I know John needs to leave before 12, so I'm not really dangling a carrot of a 5-minute break. We'll just see how it goes, but if we can get one, we will. So that report, we were asked to receive the assurance report highlighting current safety issues, to note the increase in serious incidents, and it's very good to hear from you, Kim, about the internal summit. We note that remedial actions have been taken. There were no identified themes or trends. And we then also note the internal maternity summit to be held on the 9th of December, so that all recent SIs, risks and concerns can be considered and immediate learning taken place and supported. This is best practice and a mature senior management approach that I think the being well led, safe and to promote safe learning culture is essential. And I think this service really demonstrates that in a very good way. So could we please indicate our agreement to receive and to make those 2 notes? Thanks. So I think we've got our Director of Integrated Governance, Bernie George, is going to introduce item 17.
Thanks, Maury. I'm going to take this as read, but we'll just give the kind of updated position since this was reviewed and scrutinised at the Audit and Risk Committee. So we'll just take you to section 3. There's some minor changes to wording, but in terms of 3.3, our Act did not approve the proposed downgrade to the strategic risk in relation to fire, and wanted some further assurance in relation to what was driving down that particular score. And that risk will be reviewed with Susan now she's back from leave. In relation to 3.4, you've heard of the work that's been undertaken in relation to the front door and the hard reset, and the BAF's been reflected with those actions. And the other point I just want to make is in relation to 3.5. So Susan Young talked about earlier, our Director of People and Organisational Development, some of the outputs from the People and OD Committee. What ARAC approved was the approach taken to review all of the current BAF entries in relation to workforce, and that includes the last board action in relation to reviewing a strategic risk in relation to our workforce resilience. All of the corporate risks that are currently held by People and OD will also be reviewed, and that work is commencing and will be complete for the BAF and corporate risk review process in December. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Bernie. And I was just wondering whether, in addition to what you've presented, whether Sarah Newton, you might like to make any comment. Don't feel you need to, but you're very welcome.
I think we did have a really good discussion, and Bernie has, summarised it really well, and as has the document.
Thank you. Board, are there any questions? Maybe I should say, unless you start asking some questions, there won't be any coffee break. No, okay. I think again, it's clear that the thorough work that's being done in our committees is really beginning to tell and show through in these papers and these assurances. So, Bernie, thank you. What the board is invited to approve the changes to the current strategic risks following the reviews during August, September and October. So we do need that actual approval, and to note the current position on the top rated risks on the corporate risk register. Again, I perhaps would comment on the fact that this seems to me to be an increasingly live and valuable document. So if board would be good enough to indicate their approvals and note. So, Sian, do we have either John or Joe with us yet?
We have Joe Burton with us, Chair, so you may want to take that item next. And move to John.
Lovely, thank you very much. Welcome, Joe. Thank you for stepping in early. It's almost unheard of that we should be ahead of ourselves, so I'm grateful for you making your time available. Joe Burton is our Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, and this item is the biannual report from the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. Board members have read the report, Joe, and so if you would be good enough to keep your presentation to key points you really want us to focus on, and then we'll invite questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and hello everyone. So 3 things to note from my most recent report. So firstly, the trend of the theme of behaviours and relationships being our key cause for concern. And just to note as well that that's increased from 1 a month in September 2019 when I started in this post to now 3 a month. And obviously there might be a lot of reasons for that, but it could be about colleagues speaking up more now about concerns. Secondly, just want to note as well, as I mentioned in my report, the lack of an organisational development team and the impact that has with supporting my role and also supporting managers and continuing with our culture work and learning, really. And thirdly, something from Speak Up Month, which was last month. So we introduced some executive Speak Up sessions. So I hosted those with various members of the executive team, and they were a great success. So it was a chance for staff to come, meet the exec member, have a chat, really, check in. So we had some really good conversations going in those sessions, and I've had some feedback from staff saying they really valued those. It was great to meet the exec member, perhaps find out a bit about that person. So they were really good sessions. So as a result of that, I discussed with Kim earlier this week, we're going to carry those forward and run a session a month. So just some learning from Speak Up Month, really, get us all talking a bit more.
That's lovely and really, really good to hear, Joe. Thank you. And when I was reading the report, I did wonder, yes, whether it is that people are taking the opportunity to speak up more, which I think has to be a good thing. But I did also wonder whether the nature of this subjects is around the pressures that staff are being experiencing, everybody, and not that that's any reason not to deal with it at all. And I'll bring you in, Kim. The last thing I was going to say is absolutely celebrate those events that you've held, and I think non-executive directors, if appropriate, would be pleased to join occasionally, so that people get a chance to sort of know us as well. So, Kim.
Yeah, I think we definitely will, Chair, invite that the sessions have been warmly received and we should easily be able to do one a month. I think we have to note, in spite of operational pressures, that we've always said being brilliant, we have no tolerance to disrespect and incivility in the workplace. So whilst everyone is under pressure, we are starting to see that slight increase again, but it's beholden on all of us to remind and call out behaviours respectfully and be able to deal with that. So it's something that Joe and myself as the leads for will keep a really close eye on.
Thank you for saying that, Kim, because I think you go to the heart of the point, really, don't you, that if only all of us would look out for each other and as you say, respectfully say, you know, if somebody was being a bit short, that they possibly didn't mean to be, but give that feedback, and that would be excellent, wouldn't it? Ruth, you'd like to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Joe, as usual, thank you for your brilliant work that you do in this area. And my question follows on from what Kim was just saying, really. We know that in a sense, freedom to speak up is a backstop. And what I'd like some assurance on is, are we tracking that more people are using the normal route? That may be really difficult to do, but are we getting feedback from our managers in particular that people are coming to them more with these things? Because you can't necessarily say that because the freedom to speak up numbers are dropping or changing, that means there's a change somewhere else.
So I think my comment on that would be, Ruth, is that quite often people are coming to me in the first instance, and you know there may be several reasons for that depending on, you know, the case that we're talking about, but actually I would always recommend to that person, you know, have you spoken to your line manager about this? Is there someone else in the care group you've got good rapport with that you could go and have a chat with? So I think it is about constantly reinforcing that our staff, you know, that all the ways we can speak up, and actually if staff don't feel safe to speak up any other way, then they should come and speak to me. But yeah, continued work, Ruth, definitely.
Thank you, Joe. Are there any further questions for Joe? No, I think then, Joe, yet again, we thank you for the work you're doing, and I think it is particularly exciting that you're having those monthly meetings, because I think, as Ruth's just been saying, this is a means of a culture change that enables people to be counted, and I think we should think it more in terms of, if we see something happening and we don't comment on it, then we're colluding with it, and you know, we need to talk about that too, don't we? But I appreciate the work that you're doing, and we'll look forward to invitation to come and support you. So we are invited to discuss for assurance the biannual report from our Guardian, to discuss and note the increasing trends of behaviours and relationships as the main category of concern over the last 2 years, and to agree reporting to the board as an annual report, a biannual report, and an annual report is recommended as recommended by the National Guardian. And I do myself particularly note, and I think we should take as an action to look out for any increasing trend, and if necessary to commission some work to try and understand it further. It may link a bit back to the issue of appraisals and whether staff feel they're getting enough feedback from managers and so on in the report that we had earlier. There's a very nice comment from Tony in the chat there, that noting that your leadership on the important work and the trends it describes. So thank you from him. Colleagues, if you could please note your approval until we have enough to count. And thank you very much, Joe. As ever, you're welcome to stay and enjoy our board meeting, or not if you've got other things to do. And that means we can welcome John And John, thank you for being with us. I do know that you have to leave by 12. So again, the usual invitation to present absolute key points for discussion and to bring to our notice. Over to you.
Thanks, Murray. It's been a sort of fairly straightforward 3 months. During this time, the new cohort of junior doctors arrive, and they normally bring quite a deluge of exception reports as they bed into their new work. And once again, we've seen that. Within that, it's nearly all been extra busy activity, and there hasn't been too much of concern, but I will highlight 1 or 2 things. Taking the report as it's written, we almost need to slightly amend the report because Phil Bond came good last week with finding us a place for our rest and fatigue facilities. So we've been waiting for that for 2.5, 3 years, and it's with great joy that we've got a place now to spend our money, which is very close to the doctor's mess. So we're delighted about that. What we have seen over the course of the last year or 2 is evolutions of many different rotas, whether it's the registrars, the IMT3s, the junior doctors themselves in training, and I don't think they align quite as well as they should do, because if you look at the vacancies, we've got relatively very few vacancies, and yet we're getting an awful lot of junior doctors who are finding it hard to take study leave and holiday, and we're all getting quite a few locums. So it's some work that I've started doing with Carl, and we haven't come to a conclusion yet, but we just wonder if the rotas that we've got at the moment aren't aligning as tightly as they should do. There has been an awful lot of work and an awful lot of evolution over the last sort of year or so, but the juniors are finding it a bit challenging at the moment. 6 exception reports were called immediate safety concerns during this period. In fact, none of them were. But that doesn't change the sentiment from the junior doctors, particularly in oncology and haematology, who were, I'm not saying a victim, but certainly did experience these rotas that didn't align as well as anticipated. And there is no doubt they were short-staffed. There is absolutely no doubt as well that it was not a situation that led to risk for patients. And it was not an immediate safety concern. However, as we would recognise any exception report for what was written in it, we have made some changes, and I know that the haematologists and the oncologists are very much more happy with their current situation, and there haven't been any exception reports for the last 6 weeks or so. So that's all sorted. There really is nothing much to particularly draw to your attention of concern, only that we've started succession planning. I'm now in my 6th year as guardian, so we've started succession planning for the next guardian.
Thank you, John. That's good to hear in terms of good practice of succession planning, but we will miss you if you move from this role, but I know it can be onerous. Can I just pick up the point about the space and the yes. You know, the rest areas and so on, and it is really good to know that space has been identified, but it's a little bit like the climate change thing. You know, promises are easy to make, but actions are harder to make happen. Can you give me a little more assurance about sort of when, and not so much the space, but is it going to be a nice space? Is it going to have, you know, soft furnishings?
Okay, so back in the day, the Tahiti management corridor all belonged to junior doctors, and they're reclaiming 2 of the rooms with agreement and permission. So yes, they were originally built as junior doctors' sleeping areas, and they are destined to return there. Murray, the reality is it would be nicer to have some rest facilities closer to the main action in Trelawney Wing, and yes. We're still yet to find that. So, but you know, this is a major step forward. the need for rest facilities has been recognised in the new build that's going to come online, and I think we should be pleased we've got what we have got, even if it's not the ideal. The reality is that rooms are utilised in the Trelawney wing, and it would be very difficult to find some facilities there, yet we're still on the lookout. So yes, I can say that those places have been identified. As far as I'm concerned, they can be vacated very soon, but I'm always optimistic. But we do have to spend that money, otherwise we have to return £50,000 up the road.
Thank you. And whenever I hear anything like very soon, I panic about when will that be. But I am assured by your answer. Thank you. I'm going to take Paul and then Richard, and we need to try to get these questions dealt with before 12 o'clock because of John's commitments. Paul first, then Richard.
Thank you, Mari. John, just picking up on Appendix 2, which is the exception reports.
Yes.
There is reference in there in terms of the variance from the work schedule, where it says was meant to finish at 1700 or overtime taken. Is there any, perhaps for future reports rather than now, you may not have the detail now, but it would be good to understand the context of that in terms of how much over 1700 was it? You know, how much overtime was undertaken, because otherwise it's a bit sort of, you know, in the air really.
Thank you. Could I take Richard's question as well, and then ask John to take both of them at once? Richard.
Thank you, John. Great report as always. Just so I understand the rota problems or the holiday and study leave problems for our junior doctors, is this within the rota system in a department, or is this where people on rotations around the hospital are accumulating holiday and study leave and then wanting to take it all in one location? Because the solutions might be different, and I don't want to get involved in the solutions, that's for others to solve, but just so I can get assurance that we're addressing it properly. Is it a rotation around the hospital with accumulation, or is it the inability for a service to be able to rota leave and study leave into the working day?
Okay.
Thank you, Richard. And I think Susan might be going to come in on that after you, John. So if you want to go first, and then Susan.
Okay, so Paul first. I could give you 35 columns of report. I've chosen not to give you the time, but the time is easy to allocate. The junior doctors are asked to exception report if they work more than an hour beyond their scheduled finish time, or half an hour consistently. What I can tell you is one of those reports involved the junior doctor finishing at 10 p.m, but all the others are a matter of an hour or an hour and a half.
Okay.
The junior doctors in this trust are given permission to make their own decisions on when they stay late to accomplish the work that needs to happen. Other trusts, they need to seek permission out from the manager, but the manager's got no idea. So that's why we say that in the trust. If one junior doctor seems to be swinging it a little bit and always doing an hour, then we would sometimes put in some intervention that they need to talk to their consultant before they stay late. But yes, those times are easily supplied if necessary.
Okay, thank you for that. It's just understanding that because of we're asking all of our staff to do additional hours and overtime and such at the moment. So it's good to understand, you know, what's happening within the junior doctor spectrum as well.
And then to answer Richard's point, Richard, the juniors who rotate have very contained holiday. So they have to take 8 days, 9 days within each 4-month group, and they are not allowed, in inverted commas, to take it from one position to the next. We gave some leeway during COVID, obviously, but otherwise we do not allow that. So the maths, what you're getting, Richard, is feast and famine. So some days you got almost too many junior doctors there, and other days you haven't got enough and you've got some locums. and that just doesn't make sense when we've got the staffing that we've got, and that's because the rotations are. That's because the roles are taken in sort of piecemeal and then put together as a final product, and the final product is as it is, rather than the final product is looked at and then there's some back amendments. And that's what I'm trying to do, is to say I don't really care how it's constructed as long as the final product allows everybody to achieve what they need to. And that's, I think, one extra step that we need to put in, but that's achievable.
Thank you, John, very much. Susan.
Madam Chair, it was just for you really to give assurance on the rest areas. So Phil Bond and the rest of the team know how important this is. They know the issues around the BMA requesting money to come back. And as John pointed out, this has been going on for a number of years. So we've picked it up and it will be sorted. And Phil's been working very closely with the junior doctors on their preferred area.
Oh, that's really good to hear. Thank you for that, Susan. Great. Then, John, we've got 1 minute. Thank you very much for being with you. We are asked to, as we have discussed, and then to note your Q2 report and support the identification of junior rest facilities, which I will ask my colleagues to just indicate that we have. And there's a thank you from Richard and actually from Paul in the chat, just thanking you for your helpful replies. So people are supporting your report. Rich Smith says he supports it absolutely. So there you are. Right, thank you. Thank you for being with us. And I know you do have to go. Board, in the light of the fact that we have moved well through the agenda so far, I'm going to suggest that we do take a short break, certainly no more than 10 minutes and as quick as you can, really. And I guess take the opportunity to thank you for us moving well through the agenda, but I hope that we haven't prevented you from asking questions. So I'm happy to take more questions as we go through. So it's 12 o'clock. Shall we come back at 9 minutes past so that we're definitely back by 10 past? Okay. Don't forget to turn your screens off, cameras off. See you at 9 past. Right. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you very much for your excellent timekeeping. That's marvellous. So we're now on item 18, the mortuary security arrangements. And sadly, in the news, national, not local news, we've perhaps got a good understanding of why we've been asked to seek assurance on our security arrangements. And I think it's Jill, in lieu of Alistair, you're going to introduce our report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as I say, I'm standing in on behalf of Alistair, so I may not be able to answer direct questions, but I can certainly come back to you. So as you refer to, Mari, there's been a national alert and recommendations that all organisations ensure tight mortuary security. The paper describes our assessment and gap analysis and what we're doing to mitigate that. I think generally there is a pretty good assurance that that we are fairly compliant with the security arrangements. The only other thing to comment on is that we, because of a higher number of deaths in the hospital, we are using a temporary overflow area, which has also been assessed as meeting the security arrangements. So. And I'll take questions if I can.
Thank you very much, Jill. We have in the past paid very particular attention to our mortuary provision, and so I'm pleased to hear that it is being assessed as satisfactory. But I know colleagues will maybe have thoughts on the paper or any questions. I don't know whether folk have any question or comment. Again, it would seem that you've written a report that satisfies people's need for assurance. I think that as this has been a national issue, it's really important that we report on this, and maybe is this something that we regularly do, or should we regularly do it rather than just be prompted from you know, a particular set of circumstances? What is the norm for us?
I'm afraid I don't entirely know. I think probably now that we've had this prompt, I think I can certainly take that back and make sure that there is regular review.
Thank you. And of course, that when I was reading the report, it made me it made me think about security generally, particularly in terms of you know, vulnerable people and young people. But I know that because of COVID, we've had a lot of security on site, so I think that's that's dealt with. I think Kim wants to come in.
Yeah, it might be that it might be, Chair, considering our previous CQC actions around mortuary, this is very, very, very different. However, we all know as a system we're under considerable sustained pressure. We know that our mortuary service covers more than just the hospital. So yes, it might be that we tie that in with one of our quarterly reports. Probably I'm looking at Bernie somewhere, that how we capture that just on a quarterly basis as the sustained pressure continues, and then we don't lose sight of it, probably would be my suggestion.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I'm sure Bernie is around somewhere, but I'd be very happy with that, and certainly having it as a part of another report makes a lot of sense. Paul, you'd like to come in?
Thank you. I just think it's something we need to be cognizant of generally on security at the moment, given the events at one of the vaccination centres recently, and you know, the overall feeling. We just need to be aware of not just mortuary security, but the whole site security. All our staff, and particularly all our patients, all of whom in most cases can be deemed to be vulnerable in some shape or form.
Yes, thank you, Paul. And Bernie, I'm sorry, I didn't see your cross before I pulled Paul in, but you make the same point, Paul, as me. Bernie, you wanted to come in.
So just to say, the mortuary review their risk assessment annually, and on anything else that changes in between. What I suggest we do with this is we need to pick up the outstanding action anyway, and add that to the risk assessment. And then what I will ask them to do in relation to that is we'll put it onto our risk group work plan and get them to undertake the HTA compliance audit once a year alongside that.
Does that fit with what you were thinking, Kim?
Yeah, I think it's twofold, isn't it? I think security, that would absolutely, but I think a lot. I went to the mortuary not yesterday, the day before. It was just a little bit of a reminder for me that it's a wider than just a hospital service. I was quite taken aback that they were full.
Yes.
And it is just a reminder, maybe with the continued pressure, that we just keep an oversight of their capacity as well. So the risk for security is one thing, how we support them with their capacity issues as we are everyone else, which I think we could probably pick up with the reset and restore, just to make sure that they're supported as well.
Thank you, Kim. Ruth, I will bring your question in, but just on that point, Kim, the capacity point. When we were doing our mortuary works some 2 or 3 years ago now, I know we did make use of other facilities, didn't we? And I presume we still have that option.
Yes, we've still got that escalation process in place.
Great, thank you. Ruth, you asked a question there. Do we test it? Do you want to put that question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just wondering whether not just our mortuary security, but our wider security in that kind of secret shopper way, do we test our security services?
Thank you.
I'm happy to answer that one, Mary, as they sit under in my portfolio. So we do, and we've had quite a lot of feedback, Ruth, recently through taking on CAPAR. And we get a lot of very positive feedback about CAPAR, about the way they behave, their sort of their customer standards. I think it's given our mighty guys some very positive role modelling. And it's sad to say we get enough incidents within the hospital. They're constantly tested. We had one just last night, in fact, which is, you know, it is a sad state of affairs, but it's sort of where we're at the moment. But I think Bernie's just touched on it. We go through all of the risk assessments, of course. We do those regularly, and we have started, because security is one of our statutory compliance within the trust. So as we have done with every other area of statutory compliance, there are statutory compliance around security. So we have our own security group now that's up and running, and that will feed into the overall compliance work that Phil Bond does and pulls through as part of the quarterly estates update. So security will feature on that as well now.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Susan. And as Richard is saying, it is the overall security as well as the specifics. So I think we now have assurance on both of those. And so we are asked to confirm our assurance with regards to the trust response to the requirements in the national letter. And I think we've added to that we will report on this and to have that as an ongoing piece of assurance. Thank you for that debate. I think we all needed our cup of coffee, didn't we? Because we did better with that item. Well done. We're not usually as quiet as we've been this morning, but thank you, Jill. Thank you for introducing that report for us. It brings us then to item 19.1, the minor amendments to the scheme of delegation. And we're going to invite Sian to say anything you need us to draw our attention to. Sian.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take both items if that's okay together. So the one is it's a very small amendment to the scheme of delegation, but it's an important clarification in relation to contracts being approved outside of board, upper thresholds, who can approve. So there's a clarification there which has been through Audit and Risk Assurance Committee and is recommended to the board for approval. The other item is in relation to changes to terms of reference for committees. The full new terms of reference for Remuneration and Appointments Committee are presented to the board for approval. They've been reviewed by the committee. The committee considered two models, pros and cons of each, and following benchmark review are recommending those TORs to the board for approval. And the others are minor amendments, again important clarifications for Finance and Performance Committee and Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. They are mirror changes, so it's switching one responsibility that was in Finance over to Audit. Very happy to take any questions from the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sian. Does any of the chairs want to comment at all? No, there's been good discussion. Yes, Richard does.
I think it is just worth board noting that under the changes around the delegation, that actually for the column on it's 3.4 on page 398, just to note that in column A that's moved from the 1 million up to 10 million, which is quite a big leap. We Finance and Performance Committee were happy to approve that, so I'm not arguing against any of the recommendations of Finance and Performance Committee, but board might just want to pause on the level of that delegation up to 10 million. It's quite a change. Just draw the board's attention to that, but not to contest what Finance and Performance Committee recommended.
Thank you very much, Richard. Carl, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, please, Chair. And of course, what this amendment does is put a limit on there was no limit on the approval beforehand, so it's putting a circa £10 million limit, and in the main that is due to an approval that was sought at last time's board around a southwest wide procurement for a wide-ranging set of blood products and drugs. So it's putting a limit on rather than having an open limit, so it puts more protection back into the trust and the board for that basis, rather than opening up the limit, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, thank you for raising it, Richard, and thank you for that assurance, Carl. And I know that Sian has also put that similar response into the chat, so I think we can take that we are assured on that point. So if I could take 19.1 first, we're invited to approve the minor amendment to the scheme of delegation, clarifying the approval route for contracts where those approvals are made outside of board or committee. And also, if we give that approval, to delegate authority to the company secretary to make the required change to the published version of the scheme of delegation. So I think if you approve, then we will assume that you're happy to delegate. So if you could show your approvals for 19.1, please. And then we have moving to 19.2, which is the proposed amendments to the committee terms of reference. We've heard that clarification. None of the chairs felt the need to comment any further, and so we are invited to agree the revised terms of reference for the Remuneration and Appointments Committee, for the Finance Committee, and for the Audit and Risk Committee. And I would be grateful if you could please indicate your approvals. Thank you for doing that. So that then brings us to our starred items, and if for the benefit of the public, these are items that are there for information, but board members are invited to raise questions against them if they need to. I don't have any questions raised against the Safer Staffing biannual report. Nor do I have questions against the action from serious incident report, which is 21. The end of life care report, there has been a question raised, which I notified you of at the beginning of the meeting. So on item 22, can I ask Sarah Newton, please, to raise your question?
Thank you very much, Chair, and in very much welcoming the good work that's outlined in this report. I was just wondering what more we can do, along with our systems partners, to enable those families that want to look after and enable their family members to have a good death at home. How we can enable them to do that with support, because it's a daunting prospect, even a scary prospect for many people, very, very understandably. But with the right support in place, would like to be able to do that. So I was really just seeking some assurance about what we've been able to do, or conversations that we're having to enable that to happen.
Thank you for your question, Sarah, and indeed it is one that I've been raising in system meetings as to how we might go about that. And I'm sure Kim's in the right position to respond, and she's put her hand up. So Kim, if I could ask you to respond.
Yeah, sure. It's a really important question, especially when we try and provide choice in a really pushed environment and stretched environment. So there's quite a bit, and I'm quite happy to share. If anyone's taking notes, I can always give my piece of paper. So there is always a tri-service meeting between RCHT, CFT and the hospice, and we look at what care, who's under our care within the community, who's proposing or waiting to go to their back home, and make sure that we review those cases and expedite them accordingly. There's also additional information for families and the support for families, and there is a service in the community that absolutely provides that. It's called early support care. So it looks at identified groups and supports carers, families, multi-professionals to keep people in their place of care, but with the right support around them. There's also a new end-of-life discharge home process where we've tried to expedite some of the lessons we've learned about delays in the system, and that's a project that also includes Marie Curie as well as the hospice, because we recognise that it's wider than just ourselves and CFT or the CCG. There's also a new programme that the CCG are working with Marie Curie to bring on new volunteers. and that's for the sole proviso of supporting people and their families at this really difficult stage at home. And as part of our critical incidents response, those that had come in to see their loved ones were making really difficult decisions. There's been some specialist palliative care input, so people can have that open, honest, but most importantly, informed discussions when they're making that decision. So Sarah, that's some of the things that we've been doing from shared learning, but most of all as we go through a really challenging period and more challenging period to come.
That's a really helpful response, Kim. Thank you. And actually, you've covered a point that I was going to raise on the back of Sarah's question, but so I don't need to. I guess my only thought is it's really good to hear the response to that in terms of end of life care. I'm aware too that this probably applies to relatives of very elderly or frail people who may be being discharged from hospital, knowing that they will probably die at home. And I just pick up Sarah's point about the courage it can take. And sometimes it isn't a professional you need, it is a volunteer who might just come hold your hand or say you're doing okay. So I think it broadens out beyond end of life care.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of Louisa's role with Fraser is that virtual ward. Yeah. That care in the community, which also looks after what I would call our frail and our elderly that might not be on what we call the recognised end of life pathway, but we know are reaching the end of their life and how we support. So I've only focused here very much on that end of life, but it's wider, especially with our elderly and frail, and part of Louisa and Fraser's role is picked up with that.
Yeah. That's really helpful. Thank you, Kim. And thank you for your questions, Sarah. So we're asked to note that report as we do. I don't have any questions around the flu programme, and Susan did touch on it earlier in today's meeting. And I'll just repeat, anyone who hasn't had their flu jab, please go and get. Item 24, we have no questions raised. So we can go straight to receive and note the report. And that then brings us to item 25, where I'd like to invite Bernie, Director of Integrated Governance, to reflect any additional risks that have come up in today's meeting. We did note one change, I think.
So the three areas that I've picked up today is in relation to the two partial compliance actions in relation to the annual compliance statement for emergency preparedness. So the risk manager will pick that up with Susan for our corporate risk register. We've obviously had the recent discussion in relation to mortuary. And in light of the discussion that we had around freedom to speak up and the work that Susan Young is doing in relation to health, staff health and well-being, we'll pick that up with both Susan and Kim in terms of reflecting that back in the BAF in December.
That's very helpful, Bernie. Thank you. Did any other member of board notice anything that Bernie hasn't covered? I think you've covered my points, Bernie. Yeah, I can see nods around the room. I think you have covered it. Thank you. So the action is for that to be updated accordingly. Which brings us a little ahead of time to our questions from the public, and I do know that we have received questions from the public, so I'm going to invite our company secretary Sian to read out questions posed by members of the public and which comply with the protocol that everybody has got in their pack, so I'm not going to read out. So Sian, if I could invite you to read these questions one at a time and then call upon the appropriate directors to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just first mention that unfortunately I'd added the wrong link onto the front of the agenda. So for some members of the public at the start of the meeting, they were having problems logging on. We corrected that in the early part of the meeting, and just to thank a member of the public who brought that to my attention. We've received 3 questions, all from the same person. I'm going to put all 3 to the board. First question is from Jane Bernal. She's asked all 3 questions. What information is available to you and to the public about the diagnoses, presenting state and age of those arriving in A&E, those admitted and those awaiting discharge after they are judged to be medically fit for discharge? We see a lot in the press that seems to pit one part of the system against one another. I support Kim's view that the problems must be systemic. It would be easier to make public arguments with better information. And Susan Bracefield, the Chief Operating Officer, is going to respond. Thank you.
Thanks, Sian. So our information systems in RCHT are fantastic. So we know exactly each and every person that comes through our front door, why they're with us. There is a degree of confidentiality, so it's not something that we talk about in huge depth and detail at board, but we have all of the information available to us to tell us. We have our system that's it's called Radar, and it's an electronic system that allows anybody that's got access to it to see who's in our ED department. It's on my screen all of the time. I keep a very close eye on Radar. It tells me how many ambulances we're holding, and in fact what sort of conditions people are presenting on the back of ambulance, so that even from my office I can pick up the phone to ED and speak to the consultants to say, actually, do you know what, I think this particular patient could maybe go to one of our community assessment and treatment units. In terms of those that are awaiting discharge who are medically fit, we have around 70 to 75 up to 85 at any one day of this cohort of folk. They are rather it's not a term I like. They're termed as bed blockers in our press. They are not bed blockers. These are people who are caught up in a system at the moment that is so much under pressure that we're struggling to move people on. And what we don't want to do is move people to the wrong care, which sounds it sounds almost obvious, doesn't it? But when you're under pressure in an acute trust, you make decisions, and you must make sure the decisions you make are right for people, because they have long, far-reaching consequences. So we work very closely with our system partners. CFT, the community services, also have issues with people who are also in their beds that can't move on. So we have this cascade. And what we do, Jane, is we categorise patients now, as we're asked to nationally, into what they call the P categories for discharge. So we know how many people are waiting for residential homes, nursing homes, how many of those are waiting for dementia specialist homes, how many are waiting for packages of care, reablement. So we categorise all of those patients, and we treat them as individual human beings. These are not a set of numbers that we deal with. These are human beings where we review their needs every single day within what we call our flow hub. And then we have a variety of meetings with the system. So there's always one at 11:30, which is our tactical call. In fact, we have another strategic call at 1 o'clock, which Tony chairs, and I'll join to give the latest update from RCHT, so that we can get people moved on in their journey throughout their care. So we have all of the information. In terms of letting the public know, we have Laura Mason and the team who send out comms as and when we need to. What we don't want to do is bombard the public with lots and lots of information that they stop seeing it. We want to feed information to the public when it's absolutely necessary to do so, whilst also protecting people's confidentiality. There are certain things we have to be very careful about the messages that we give out, so that we don't startle or scare our public. We know the concern that there is at the moment about waiting lists and how long people are waiting for their, whether it's an operation or whether it's some sort of intervention. So that information we're feeding back to our GPs, so that our GPs can have those very careful conversations with their patients, rather than it going out in the press. And I am sorry that the press pit us against each other. That's certainly not the way that we work. We work very collaboratively and collegiately, understanding each other's issues. And the issue that we have, that we all coalesce around, is not holding ambulances. So I have these conversations with adult social care. They get it. They understand the response times are incredibly important, not for our CHT, but I think, Mara, you mentioned it earlier, for the people of Cornwall generally. So I hope that answers the question. I'm more than happy to give any more information, but we are data rich, which is fantastic for us in RCHT. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. That was a really helpful answer. Sian.
Thank you. Question 2 from Jane. This is to Susan Young. And Jane would just be grateful, Susan, if you could clarify comments, following comments that you made in relation to the integrated performance report. Which aspects of the COVID emergency continue to impact staffing and which are now easier in terms of your reflections? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we were talking about the impact of COVID on various aspects of our staffing situations, and I think there are a number of things where, you know, it's been the issues we've talked about today. Actually, the biggest issue I think that's had the most difficult impact has been that on staff resilience and the staff health and well-being, and on, you know, things like our sickness absence rates, and as we saw in the performance reporting, some of those other things that have slipped as well, just because of those massive operational pressures, of which COVID is a part, but it's not the whole story. So I think those are the sorts of things which have had the most difficult impact. But there are, I think, some positive things that we've seen as well. And I'm sure this trust, like many others, has had lots of learnings from these experiences. One thing that strikes me is that the trust has been successful in attracting people into the NHS. I think that's been nationally actually one of the positive things we've seen about people wanting to join the NHS and wanting to take part and to support the health service in this country. So I think that's been a real positive actually. And the other thing I think is just to refer back to that patient story that we had at the beginning of the meeting and the experience that Kim and Louisa shared. There's some real positives in that for staff, I think, as well, in terms of the new ways of working. And I think that's got positive impact on staff as well as on patients.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful, Susan. Appreciate that. Sian.
Thank you, Chair. Last question from Jane. Of the monies allocated to RCHT, what assurance can be given to RCHT board about how much will be spent within the trust or the local NHS, and how much with the Duchy, Probus or other private providers? And I think the Director of Finance is going to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Sian. I think it's the first point to make is that as part of the sort of H2 plan, as part of the national planning framework, it's the private sector is a key part of certainly the elective recovery programme, and the resource that came into the system as part of the H2 plan, the CCG will commission directly with those private sector providers, as they have done for many years, for the provision of certain services. From an RCHT perspective, we have for a number of years also subcontracted with local private sector providers to support our elective recovery work, our elective work and now elective recovery work, as well as providing shortfalls in capacity where clearly you know, we are seeking to get patients through the system appropriately. In terms of the financial values, I can't set those out as we sit here at the moment because some of those values haven't been agreed, or we haven't gone through the contract process with those local providers. But it will be part of this year's and ongoing elective recovery to utilise the whole of the system, including private sector providers, to maximise the resource and push people through the elective system where we can. We have a number of freedom of information requests around the amount of money we spend in private sector provision. Very happy to be transparent externally on that basis, but certainly through our finance reports, the board will be cited this year how much we are spending through that route. So it's just a timing issue in terms of numbers. But there is no issue about publicising or making that available to the public.
Thank you very much, Carl. That's helpful. And I think Kelvin would like to come in on that.
Yeah, just to build, obviously, because Carl there's covered, the clinical services aspects. Obviously, part of the bidding process has also covered digital solutions, and it's a similar model in effect that we procure solutions where it absolutely makes sense to buy in something which is common in the IT industry. We then adopt and support those solutions. So again, being transparent in terms of where we have that mix of in-house supported and bought-in solutions.
Thanks, Kelvin. That's helpful addition there. I appreciate that. So, Jane, thank you very much for your questions, and indeed for any other members of the public. We do welcome questions, and I think we have noticed that this medium of holding our board meetings has actually facilitated some attendance that otherwise might not have happened. But I know, Jane, you attend in a very regular and loyal way, so thank you for your questions. That then is the end of the public questions, and it brings us to item 27, our evaluation of the effectiveness of this meeting. And for the benefit of members of the public, just to say that we had a very good board development day a month ago, and as a result of it, we decided we would evaluate the meeting against some slightly different criteria. So if I could remind members that we're saying what went well and what would have been better if. But we've also now confirmed our board etiquette policy, and so we want to determine whether we've been consistent with that etiquette. And also we had a very good contribution to the development session on patient safety generally. And so how has what we've been talking about today actually made a difference to keeping patients safe, which seems like a really key question. So I think members of the board, I would be grateful for comments in an evaluative way against any or all of those topics. And to kick the ball off, I'll say it's very clear that one of the patient safety things was absolutely attended to in the mortuary report, wasn't it? That security question that people raised. So how have we done today? Sarah Newton first.
Thank you, Chair. I think the programme that was outlined by Susan, but also by Kim and supported by all of the executive colleagues around the Reset and Restore programme will be essential for patient safety, because we have to have an equal focus on the safety of our staff, the safety and well-being of our staff, so that they can provide a safe service to our patients. And so I took assurance from how that programme was described to us that would help towards patient safety. And that's over and above the normal assurance processes that all the committees go through, focused on the highest risks in our register and making sure that we're doing everything we can to focus all our effort to providing that safe environment.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Other comments?
Shall I have a go, Mary?
Tony, yes, thank you very much.
Yes, thanks. I mean, it's been a huge agenda, and I think we've got through it in a very purposeful way. And I absolutely don't think in any way have we compromised good governance and good assurance. I think it's demonstrated that the board subcommittees are doing their job, and I think it's also demonstrated that the papers are getting better, which is great. I have to say, I think the meeting being all on Teams actually works better. I think rather than just trying to have a hybrid approach to it, it feels to me that being all on Teams probably just works better. So I think that's worked well. I think the papers have worked well. And in terms of the patient safety and the priorities, I think we've had the right conversations. We've talked about caring for our people, our colleagues. We've talked about caring for the money, and we've talked about caring for the patients. And I think all of that has come through pretty much in all of the items, actually, in one way or another.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you for that, Tony. I think I mentioned earlier I was a little concerned that I hadn't curtailed questions, but I do actually feel that the papers have been of a good standard, although they were daunting when we first started on them. I'm sure everybody would know that, and I hope people have found it helpful that we have separated starred items and others, and indeed we did have questions sent through. So I think that system's working, and I think I feel as if it has been quite a buoyant conversation. I haven't felt as if people are not speaking for any bad reason. I particularly want to thank people who've made presentations for doing such a succinct job of it. It does help us really, because you help to focus our minds on where we should be looking. So I think that's probably gone well. So if there are no further comments, that we have our next meeting planned for the 6th of January. Oh, no, sorry, Richard missed you. Go on. Apologies.
That's fine, Chair. No problem. I was just going to supplement some of the earlier conversation really around. I think what I've taken from the meeting today is that good assurance that's coming through the subcommittees. And I think that's giving us a confidence to lay out our prioritisation and address our prioritisation with a degree of immediacy. So I think we're also getting confidence to allow the executives to function within the parameters of that clear prioritisation based on the assurance that we're getting through the subcommittee work. So it's freeing up some of the board, looking at the detail of assurance to allow us to focus on how we can be responsive and purposive in the immediacy of the future, which is a challenge for the Trust and the whole of the NHS.
Thank you, Richard, and you give me cause to reflect that the board has been through a period of the pandemic as well, haven't we? And we've had to get used to different ways of working. And maybe today's performance has been a bit more about settling as a board and committees settling as well. And actually endorsing Tony's comment that, in fact, although we were wanting to go back to having meetings together, safely together, it didn't seem like the right modelling given where Cornwall is with COVID at the moment. So it does feel as if we've all got smarter at using this way of working. It's certainly efficient. Paul.
Just to pick up, really, I think I would endorse Tony's comments on the video side of things. I think it works very well and is actually more inclusive to the public. But just also emphasise to those public members who are listening to us at the moment or watching us at the moment, the subcommittees we talk about, they've probably done between 16 and 20 hours work this month. So there's been a lot of discussion, debate and exploration of what sometimes seems quite a quick paper that comes to the main board meeting. So the fact that we may be or not have many questions, it's because there's been quite extensive exploration of the issues at those subcommittees, and that's probably the way it should be.
That's really helpful, Paul, just to let members of the public know how many hours do go into those committee meetings. And because they are slightly less formal type of meeting, I think there's very good debate happens there.
And Great. I've just seen Sarah's comment in there, and the hours of reading beforehand.
Yes, and the hours of reading beforehand. Okay, right. Well, thank you. That felt like a good morning, good morning's work, and many thanks for all the papers. As I was just saying, the date of the next meeting is the 6th of January. We are going to take a break now before moving to our session in private, where we consider matters that are deemed to be confidential, as per the notice at the end of the agenda. So I think we probably could reward ourselves with actually starting at 1:30 like we intended to, because other people may have made different arrangements. So I think we should stick to the 1:30 and take time to eat without getting indigestion or whatever else we do at lunchtime. And I will look forward to seeing you in the new invitation and at 1:30. Thank you very much.